Just want to make sure.
I don't know.
Stream starting soon.
Yeah, it looks like
We're live.
okay, everybody. Hello. And it looks like this is not started on YouTube for some reason. Maybe I have to actually go to YouTube
Let me check. I'll
and
check.
start the stream separately. Let me do that real quick. I hope this doesn't just absolutely fuck everything if I do this. Pull this down.
You can hear me, right? I just want to make sure.
Oh, it is popped up. Oh, outstanding. So it did pop up automatically. That's fucking awesome. Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can shut this down now. So it is actually working on YouTube. Okay, everybody. Sorry. Everybody's listening to me figure this out live. That's hilarious.
Can you
Okay,
hear me?
everybody. Hello. Welcome to the channel. And I appreciate you guys tuning in. This is going to be the second video in our series on failed prophecies. This will be a short series. I've got my featured guest speaker, JonnyB Animations, who's been actually really putting all this together. I'm just setting up providing the platform, and he's really doing all the legwork on this. Last series we did, our last show that we did in this, and these shows are going to pop off on the first Sunday of every month. This is a new start time for me. So hopefully people will figure out that we're streaming today instead of yesterday, because that's a change I'm going to stick with. It's a little bit later in the afternoon as well. And it's going to be so much better for me because you might even be able to hear it in my voice, but I've gotten so much more sleep. I'm so much more well rested. I've actually got some coffee in me. So this is going to work out a lot better for me personally. We'll see if Sunday's the day that people can tune in or not. But in our last show, we talked about the virgin birth. And so let's see what I have pulled up here on my screen. So I didn't do a great job because I was so tired last show. But I just wanted to just really quick touch on where we're at historically, because we're working with the book of Isaiah. The last show we talked about the virgin birth narrative. That is really in the 8th century, and this is the period where Assyria is getting ready to besiege Israel, or to conquer Israel, and then try to besiege the Jerusalem temple. So you can see in that virgin birth narrative, there was conflict with the northern and southern kingdoms, and the southern kingdom was saying, "Hey, it's going to be okay because Assyria is actually going to come in and take out Israel for us," which is exactly what did happen. And it started what we call this diaspora, right, where the Israelites were actually exiled. And you could even see the different stages throughout this time period, right? This is nearing the end of the 8th century when you had the first deportation effort, and this ran in 3 stages. This would be the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and you can look from the green all the way, including this tan color here. This is all Assyrian territory. You'll see that Babylon is actually annexed in here to the Assyrian kingdom, right? So this virgin birth narrative was actually prior to where Babylon had finally conquered Assyria. The Medes are up here. And so this runs all the way towards the very end, right here, 715, the very end of the 8th century. And after Israel falls to Assyria, they attempted unsuccessfully to besiege Jerusalem. They end up annexing in Judah, but they never could conquer Jerusalem. Jerusalem did surrender at one point. Okay, so now that moves us into what we call Deutero-Isaiah. Scholars are convinced that Isaiah was actually written in 3 sections. So the first 39 chapters would be the first section of Isaiah, and that covered the virgin birth narrative. I think that was chapters 7 and 8. And Deutero-Isaiah starts at 40, and it goes 40 to, I want to say 55, 56. Right. Is that what you got as well?
Yeah, it's 55, yeah.
55, yeah. And then Trio Isaiah, or Trito Isaiah, then completes the rest of the book. So if I take this off, give me 1 second here to bring us up to the current. Let me get this out. And let me take this screen off.
We'll be
stop. Go ahead.
At one point, there's a callback to 53 in 60. There's a minor callback. Whoever wrote it, I guess, saw the previous chapters, and they added a callback to something in 53. But we'll get there.
So this is going to be now the period where, so in between the end of the 8th all the way through the 7th century is the period where Babylon is now starting to rise up against Assyria. Babylon eventually does conquer Assyria, and at which point then Babylon is now taking on Judah, and Babylon will eventually conquer Jerusalem and destroy the temple. That sends the Israelites into their final diaspora, because both Assyria and Babylon would do this deportation where they take people out of wherever their homeland is and they spread them out through the kingdom, and then they would take people throughout the kingdom and move them in. And this is actually where we get the Samaritans from, is part of that deportation recolonization effort, right, into Samaria. And so the reason they did that is because it would help prevent revolts, because if they just left everybody there, then people would eventually rise up and then there would be revolts. So to try to minimize that, they would move people out. They would also set up vassal kings, right, to try and keep people under control. So during the late 7th century, before the Common Era, Judah became a vassal kingdom of Babylon. In 601, before the Common Era, Jehoiakim, king of Judah, revolted against Babylon rule. Despite the strong remonstrances of the prophet Jeremiah, Jehoiakim died for reasons unclear and was succeeded by his son Jeconiah. In 597, before the Common Era, the Babylonians besieged Jerusalem and the city surrendered. Nebuchadnezzar pillaged Jerusalem and deported Jeconiah and other prominent citizens to Babylon. Jeconiah's uncle, Zedekiah, was installed as king. Later encouraged by the Egyptians, Zedekiah launched a second revolt, and Babylonian army was sent to retake Jerusalem. And this is what is commemorated by the Jewish holiday. Actually, there's a few different wars that were actually part of this. It's the Tisha B'Av, I think I'm saying that correctly, around 587, 586, where the Babylonians took Jerusalem. They destroyed the first temple, burned down the city. The small settlements surrounding the city and those close to the western border of the kingdom were destroyed as well. According to the Bible, Zedekiah attempted to escape, but was captured near Jericho. He was forced to watch the execution of his sons, and his eyes were put out. So the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple triggered a profound religious, political, and cultural crisis. It left a lasting imprint on biblical literature, notably in prophetic writings. The kingdom of Judah was abolished and annexed as a Babylonian province, with its center in Mizpah. The Judean elite, including the Davidic dynasty, were exiled to Babylon. After Babylon had fallen to Cyrus the Great, that's when we start then the Persian period. And remember, Cyrus then allows the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. That would then start what we call the Second Temple period. So this is the period in history that we're actually going to talk about right now with the suffering servant. We're going to see that this prophecy that Christians claim is about Jesus, and it's Jesus is supposed to be this suffering servant, right? Well, we'll see here. Johnny's going to explain to you that this is actually about Israel, and this is the period in history that they're talking about. So I'll let Johnny take over. I'm going to bring up. Let me stop sharing. I want to bring up Bible Gateway so we can actually read along with what Johnny's got for us here. Go ahead, Johnny. Take it over.
So Christians often claim that Isaiah 53 is about Jesus. They claim that he is the suffering servant, and that this is somehow about an atonement where he died for our sins. That's simply not the case, and this misunderstanding stems from the fact that a lot of them, unfortunately, at least in my experience, I can't speak for all of them, have not actually read the chapters leading up to it. The author is assuming that by the time you get to 53, you've read all of it. You've read chapters, you've at least read chapters 40, at least from chapter 40 to 53, so that way you know what's going on. So first, I would like objective to bring up Isaiah 41, 8 through 9, Isaiah 43, 10, Isaiah 44, 1 through 2, and that's good for now.
Okay, I've got 41, starting 8 and 9 on the screen right now.
So first, the servant in Deutero-Isaiah is very consistently identified as being the nation of Israel, and we'll start this now. Isaiah 41:8-9 says, "But you, Israel, my servant, Jacob, whom I have chosen, you descendants of Abraham, my friend, I took you from the ends of the earth, from its farthest corners. I called you. I said, you are my servant. I have chosen you and have not rejected you." So, the servant is Israel.
And what's the next verse you want me to bring up?
43:10.
43. And
First,
we'll go down to verse
10.
10 here.
Go up a little bit. I think at the
Okay.
beginning.
You said verse 10?
Yeah, could you go up to the beginning first a little bit?
Or you want to go? Oh, of course.
A little bit more. There it is. It says, "But now this is what the Lord says, He who created you, Jacob, He who formed you, Israel. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you." Keep that in mind later. "I have summoned you by name. You are mine." Now let's go to 43:10. "You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, and my servant whom I have chosen, so that you may know and believe me and understand that I am He. Before me no God was formed, nor will there be one after me." So Israel are the witnesses and the servant that God has chosen. And
And what now?
He's redeeming them. It tells you at the beginning that He has redeemed them. Keep that in mind later, people watching, viewers. 44:21 and 48:20. Well, we'll just do one at a time. It'll be fine. "Remember these things, Jacob, for you, Israel, are my servant. I have made you. You are my servant. Israel, I will not forget you." So again, the servant is Israel.
And the final verse you want me to bring up is 45?
48:20. Well, first, actually, you're right. I should have noted that first. So what he was saying before is that King Cyrus the Great is the one who eventually freed them, and that's actually written in Isaiah 45. He is the
That's
person
something I
that.
just really quick. Sorry to cut you off, but that's something I actually want to, even though this isn't necessarily pertinent to what we're talking about with the servant, I do want to highlight this right here. If you go to 45:1, so depending on your Bible translation, sometimes it will say Cyrus is the anointed one. Other translations will specifically translate it as Messiah. If you read the Old Testament, you'll find out that the very first mention of the Lord's Messiah is actually Cyrus the Great.
Yep.
So people talk about Jesus being the Messiah, but it's actually, there's no mention, there's not a single mention that it ties Jesus' name to the Messiah until you start to get into different interpretations of the New Testament. But as far as the Old Testament is concerned, Cyrus the Great is actually the first person. In fact, I think he's the only person in the Old Testament that's actually mentioned by name as the Lord's Messiah. So
I believe Micah 5:2 is referring to Solomon. So I believe Solomon is also technically considered a Messiah, but Messiah just
okay.
means one. It's just a term for certain types of priests or kings. And so technically, most of the kings in the Old Testament would be considered, at least to some point, messiahs. At least the kings of at least the kings of Judah. So, but yeah, King Cyrus in 45 is specifically mentioned as being the Messiah, and he's going to come and free the Israelites from captivity. It's good that you caught that, because I wouldn't have mentioned that. I forgot to write that down.
And I did. You're right. I did misspeak. I said he's the only person mentioned by name as the Messiah. No, that's not true. You're right about Solomon. It's the Cyrus is the only non-Israelite who's called the Messiah. Everyone else is actually tied to Israel itself. So, or non-Jew, non-Hebrew, whatever. So Cyrus is the only foreigner who is called a Messiah. And Messiah translates as anointed one, which is why kings and prophets could be considered Messiah as well. But as far as non-Hebrew, non-Israelite, Cyrus the Great is the only one. And then what's the next verse you want me to go to? 48, you said?
Yeah, 48. Let me find out. 48:20. So this one is actually going to play into two different things, and I'll explain that in a second. It says, "Leave
Okay, we're at
Babylon."
48:20.
Yeah. Leave Babylon, flee from the Babylonian, announce this with shouts of joy and proclaim it. Send it out to the ends of the earth. The Lord say the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. So this is two things. First, it tells us that the servant is Israel, Jacob. That's the same thing. It's also telling them that their exile is over. They can go. They can flee from Babylon. Go spread the word that God has redeemed you. So this is very important to the overarching theme that's going on here, is that God is redeeming his servant Israel, and after the redemption, the other nations will see that this is happening, and they will come to God, seeing that he has redeemed Israel.
So the timeline on that would be right about 539, when Cyrus allows the Jews to return. That's 539 is when Cyrus conquers Babylon, and after at 539 before the Common Era, and then at that point, then he allows the Jews to return. And there's an interesting. I've heard some people make the claim that in the Cyrus cylinder, Cyrus refers to Yahweh as the God, right? The Lord. And that's actually a misunderstanding of the Cyrus cylinder. Cyrus actually talks, he does this all throughout history. Every time he frees people, which he does a lot, he allows them to return to worship their gods. He does not refer to their gods as the God, because Cyrus actually believed that Ahura Mazda was God, was the God, because remember, they were Zoroastrians. And so they actually worshipped Ahura Mazda. You'll see that listed with Darius the Great, where he specifically mentions Ahura Mazda. But so that's a little bit of a misunderstanding or intentional misunderstanding. I'm not sure when it comes to these claims. It's hard to know if the people are just being ignorant or they're intentionally twisting the truth. But Cyrus never did worship Yahweh, despite what people try to say. He did recognize that Yahweh was the God of the Israelites, and he did tell them, go back and worship your God, but he did not refer to Yahweh as the God.
But you got to keep in mind, viewers, I'll just refer to the people watching, the viewers. You got to keep in mind, though, that the people writing this believe that Yahweh is the one true God. So they wrote it from their perspective of Cyrus saying, return to the God, because from their perspective, Yahweh is the God. But King Cyrus didn't actually believe that. But he did allow them to go back to worshiping the God they believed in.
I have a guest coming, I believe it is next week, Tavo, who is a Christian, and we're going to be talking about comparative theology.
Ooh.
And in that, I'll probably mention more of this, but Yahweh, the way the gods worked in this time period is gods were gods of a particular region. And so many people believe that when you worshiped a god, it was localized to a particular region, right? In fact, there's a video I'll play, and I don't want to get too much into this because I'm going to talk about it next week with Tavo. But so when they got to go back to worship God, they actually, Yahweh is the God of this particular area. Now, Yahweh was actually transposed from a different area as part of a different pantheon altogether. And so when the Hebrews left Canaan and started migrating out of the land of Canaan, they took the Yahweh God, essentially the worship of the Yahweh God, with them. And then that became the God of then the territory of Israel. So that's very interesting how all that works. And I'm sorry, brother, what chapter do you want to go to next?
Don't apologize. This is good for the people to know. I'm glad that you tell the viewers these things, because they need to know that. Well, they don't need to know it, but it's good for them to know. Isaiah 49:3, and that's the last one before we get into the other segment, which is the overall theme.
Yeah, a lot of the church leaves out a lot of the actual history conveniently.
He said to me, "You are my servant."
Here's Isaiah 49 chapter.
Isaiah 49:3. He said to me, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my splendor." So not only is he saying you are my servant Israel, but he's saying he is going to use him to display his splendor. So these are all the mentions where Israel is specifically mentioned as being the servant. It's almost like Israel is the servant and not some future Messiah. Now, it is true that there are some rabbis at the time period that did say this was messianic, but for the most part, that wasn't the view. It was about the redemption of Israel for the most part. Now, I did I had this conversation with someone a while back, but they asked me, "Well, when did Israel get redeemed?" Well, they didn't. It's because it's a failed prophecy. It's all it is. It's just a failed prophecy. But the intention of it was to say that Israel will be redeemed, and then all of the nations will flock to Yahweh as a result of that. It just never happened that way because it's a failed prophecy.
That is then tied to the new heaven and new earth and stuff like that, but we're not going to get all into that.
Yeah,
but
getting into that today, maybe not.
And that's actually tied to, in fact, if you go back to Isaiah in First Isaiah, I believe it's in chapter 9, you'll see mentions of this, where it's the Messiah will rule from the throne of David, right? So that's all futuristic prophecy. And a lot of Christians will point to that and say, oh, okay, this is another prophecy that's been fulfilled. But obviously, Jesus never sat on any throne, right? So there was no king that never happened. And so you could say it might happen in the future, but you can't say it has happened yet because it hasn't happened. Jesus was, I think Jesus was stoned to death personally. I don't think he ever was crucified. But either way, he's not around anymore.
Yeah, I personally impression that he was stoned first, then crucified. But for all we know, he was just stoned. We don't really have many reliable sources that tell us specifically how he was killed. You know, it's either or. Yeah.
And what chapter do you want to go to next?
40, 1 through 2.
Back to chapter 40.
So now we're going to be moving into going over the whole overarching theme. Regrettably, we can't read all of chapters 40 to 55 here for you today, but we can go over the key highlights that tell you what's going on. All right.
Okay, here's back to chapter 40.
Comfort, my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. So it's specifically telling us that the Israelites are free. The inhabitants of Jerusalem are now free from exile, and they're going to be paid double for the sins that they were punished for.
What chapter now?
Isaiah 48:20.
48:20?
Yep. We already read this one, but it's important to go back to.
Sure.
Leave Babylon. Flee from the Babylonian. Announce with the shouts of joy and proclaim it. Send it out to the ends of the earth. Say the Lord has redeemed his servant Jacob. So we already mentioned this one before, but this is part of the overarching theme, is that God is he's redeeming the Israelites and then they're going to be free from captivity, and he wants them to go and tell people that that's what's happened, that he has redeemed them.
And again, you see servant tied specifically to Jacob. And remember that Jacob is called Israel, right? So oftentimes you'll see those two names switched back and forth.
Yeah.
And Israel translates as, I believe it's wrestles with God, if I remember correctly.
Something like that, yeah.
Because remember when the angel of the Lord and Jacob wrestled, right? And then the angel of the Lord dislocates his hip, I think it was. I'd have to reread that because it's been so many years since I actually read that story. But I believe that's where his name gets changed to Israel, and Israel means wrestles with God. Okay, what chapter do you want to go to?
49:3.
Okay, verse 3.
He said to me, "You are my servant Israel, in whom I will display my splendor." My translation says, "In whom I will be glorified," but either one works. So this is how God is going to bring the nations to him through the redemption of Israel. He wants Israel to go out and tell people after their redemption that he is the one that did it, so that way they will come to him. That's or the building overarching theme here. Isaiah 52:9 through 10.
Oh, what's this? If I get rid of that.
Wait, what happened?
I don't know. I got some ad popped up here. I wonder if I can. Let me see if I can shrink that down. Give me 1 second here to fix that. Jesus. Okay.
Oh, no.
I took up like the whole screen. Okay, you You said 53?
Yeah, you got to get a paycheck from them. They were using you as free advertising.
I know it.
Isaiah 52, 9 through 10.
Oh, 52.
9 through 10, yeah. The suffering servant narrative begins towards the end of 52. Is when it first is mentioned. Or is when it first starts.
9 through 10. Here we are.
Burst into songs of joy, you ruins of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. So, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some of the Israelites, they're being freed now. He has comforted them, and because of this, the ends of the earth will see the salvation of God because he is bearing his holy arm before them.
Another thing that you can see if you pay attention to the way these things are written is that their concept of the earth was basically a very small part of what the actual earth is, because they thought the earth was flat, for one thing, and they thought that the entire world was basically within the parts that they had traveled to or heard or maybe gotten through trade and commerce. Like this is before the Silk Roads were built, but there probably was some type of trade that was going on with Asia Minor, perhaps. So they knew that there was some land outside of this, but they had no way of knowing anything about like the North or South American continents, Australia, things of that nature. So to them, the Earth was a very, very small section of what the actual Earth was.
They believed that the ancient Near East was basically all there was, that the Earth was flat. You know, the Earth, you know, their region was just surrounded by water, and they believed there was a firmament above them, and God lived above the firmament. When they're talking about heaven, they believe that that heaven was just the sky, and God lived above the heavens. He lived above the sky. What they believed.
Exactly, and the Earth was held up by pillars. I believe 7 pillars, if I remember correctly.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, it could be wrong, but I think it was 7 pillars.
And what chapter do you want to go to next?
Let me get to it. 52:13.
Oh, 13. We're still in 52. So now we're moving down to 13. And here we go. The suffering and glory of the servant.
Yes, this is a good one. Let me get to it. Hold on. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted, just as there were many who were appalled at him. His appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So, his servant, Israel, will be raised up and lifted and highly exalted. That's fitting with the theme that's going on. Israel is going to be redeemed, and then they're going to get to go out and tell everybody that they have been redeemed by God. They're going to be lifted up and exalted. They're going to be free. And then he refers to them as being disfigured beyond that of any human being because of their reputation previously.
Give me 1 second to say hello. Mr. Norton has joined, and this gentleman actually should, you know what? I think after I do this video, Dan, I will add a link to your channel into the description. I don't know if I could do it right now live. I probably could if I could figure it out. But I just met this gentleman recently. He has a PhD, I believe it's in philosophy, and he talks a lot about Ayn Rand, and he's scheduled to be a guest this month on the show. We're going to be discussing Ayn Rand's ethics. So he's got a very interesting channel. It's if you're into philosophy, especially Ayn Rand, I highly recommend checking out Dan Norton's channel. Okay, good to see you, brother. Okay, now what chapter do you want me to go to next? We're ready 53?
Yep, 53:1.
Okay,
who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? Well, they just told us a second ago who the arm of the Lord was going to be revealed to. In 52:9 through 10, it says, "The Lord has bared his holy arm before the eyes of all the nations." So it's nations. He's bared his holy arm before the nations. Isaiah 53:2. Well, you're already there. I had to go back to look at it, but you were already there. He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. Now, this is about Israel, and we can actually see this if we go to chapter 60. If we go to chapter 60, if we go to, what is it, 60:21. The glory of Zion, part of Israel. Then all of your, wait, where is it? Then all of your people will be righteous, and they will possess the land forever. They are the shoot I have planted, the work of my hands for the display of my splendor. So we're getting the same the plant kind of analogy, the plant imagery for Israel, and we get the same thing in Isaiah 53. So that's the root out of dry ground is Israel.
I'm going to go back really quick to 53 because the actual prophecy is 53. The alleged prophecy is actually 53 we were talking about there.
Yeah.
So you can see that the foretelling, all of this foretelling, this looking into the future, so to speak, is all referenced and put into context between what Johnny has already mentioned here with who is the servant, where's the split between what's happening and at the time and then what's happening in the future. And it all has to do with the nation of Israel being redeemed and restored. If you read through Jeremiah, Micah, if you read through all the prophets, so much of the Old Testament is actually written during this period, during the Babylonian exile. This is the Torah in particular, probably written. Experts say that probably Deuteronomy was started first as far as the 5 books. That Genesis and Exodus were then composed. So that would have been 624 before the Common Era for Deuteronomy. And Genesis and Exodus are written by the J.E. source. If you follow the documentary hypothesis, which I think is the most widely accepted hypothesis so far in scholarship, Genesis, Exodus, and Numbers would have been written by the J&E source around 586 before the Common Era. Then you get Leviticus, and then changes to the Genesis, Exodus, Numbers narrative, all done by the P source. And then you have the redactor, who is basically like kind of compiling this and then probably making some changes. That would be around 350 before the Common Era. Isaiah itself, first Isaiah, as we mentioned before, around the middle to the end of the 8th century. Then the second part of Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, gets written during the Babylonian, probably during the Babylonian exile, and then completed with the Persian conquest, and then it gets finished during the Persian period. During the Babylonian exile, you also get like Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Obadiah, Nahum, Habakkuk. All that is written basically during the same period. Some Micah and Hosea would have been written during the Assyrian period, right? And then once you get down into the Persian period, you're getting Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Jonah, Joel. So much of the Old Testament, so much of it was actually written during this period. They took Psalms and Proverbs is actually a collection throughout, especially when you talk about Proverbs, a collection of older songs and then mixed in with newer material, which again gets really organized during the Persian period. So that is almost, I'd say 70% of the Old Testament written during this period between Assyria, Babylon, and Persia, which is why that theme seems to be going over and over and over again. Kings, all of that stuff, the Davidic line. And we do have some really good historical evidence that matches up with a lot of this stuff. Unfortunately, because we have so much historical evidence, we know that the authors of these books of the Bible were basically twisting the narrative, trying explain and justify why is this happening with it's Robin's in the chat. It's always good to see you, Robin. Oh no. What did I just do there? Did I just screw that up? Can you guys still hear me? Oh, that was wild.
I don't know if they can, but I can hear you.
I'm going to stop sharing that screen anyway.
Type 1, 2, 3 if you can hear objective.
I could hear you guys. I just hit a button, which I don't know. There we go. Wow, I hit too many buttons. My screen just went completely black. That's hilarious. I'm so incompetent when it comes to running this stuff. I need to have somebody else running it. I just need to run my mouth and let somebody else run the laptop. That's hilarious. Robin, it's always good to see you. And Chris, I believe you said you told me your name was Chris. We call Bionic Chris.
Chris.
Yes, he's in the chat. He left a great comment about one of the things I had posted. I'm going to open up the panel like I always do. If any of you guys want to jump in and talk about anything that you want, we don't have to talk about this necessarily. If you have any questions specifically for Johnny, feel free. But if you want to talk about anything else, I put out a couple of videos that got quite a bit of attention. I put out a video about identity and transgender. If somebody wants to talk about that. I put out a little short yesterday that got a good response talking about, trying to change people's minds and how difficult and tricky that can be. So like I said, if you guys want to talk about anything, I will be posting this link and get ready to do that really quickly. But I got myself kind of sidetracked here with hitting all those buttons. What was I talking about? Oh yeah. So the historical period. So what really about the turn of the millennia, we actually start getting really good historical evidence that does verify characters in the Bible, narratives that are going on. It just doesn't, it just gives us also an understanding that these things are really being like spun. These stories are being spun in such a way that one, they try to make the Israelites look as good as possible. And two, when things are just going to shit, they're trying to explain what's happening, and so they talk about worshiping different idols. Yahweh's getting upset with them. And so that's why the Assyrians are able to conquer. And that's why the Babylonians were able to conquer, because it was a punishment from Yahweh. The restoration, when Persia comes in and conquers Babylon, allows the Jews to return to rebuild the temple. This is seen as a restoration. And of course, they're going to attribute this to Yahweh, right? So if you follow through the history, you could see the stories prior to the turn of the millennium, things that we're talking about, like in Genesis, the creation narrative, the global flood myth, the exile, the myth about the Jews, the Hebrews being exiled, saved from saved from Egypt when they were supposedly slaves, which we know all that stuff never happened. In fact, that's one of the things I will be discussing on this channel at some point. One, the global flood myth. That's a topic I actually do formal debates on. I just can't get anybody to take that challenge because they probably know that I'm going to roast them on that. That is such a ridiculous story. And then the exile period, or where not the exile period, but the restoration period where they were freed from slavery. The Exodus. I kept saying a different X word there. The Exodus. So supposedly, they were slaves in Egypt. But I do believe, and I think scholarship has come around to this as well, that that's really a story that harkens back to the time of the Hyksos, who were a Semitic people that were living in Egypt and actually ruled the, I believe it was a southern kingdom, if I remember correctly. Okay. So there is some historical stuff that we can look at to see kind of where these stories originated from, but there's nothing that actually matches up to the version that we get in the Bible. So it's pretty, even David, there's the Tel Dan Stele mentions the house of David and one of the kings. I think it was, I can't remember which, maybe not a king. I think there is actually a mention of a king. I can't remember which one is also mentioned in the Tel Dan Stele, but one of the names mentioned in the Bible. So we do have some historical references for some of the actual characters mentioned in the Bible, which is nice to know they didn't just make up everything whole cloth. But unfortunately, we have enough evidence that we know that they weren't telling things like that they actually happened.
Yeah, seems to be a common theme with a lot of writings from that area is they wrote with real people about, supposedly about real people, semi-real events, and then they made events, and they kind of mix it into mythology. They mix bits of real history and characters with mythology, and that was the way they told history.
I'm going to post the link if anybody wants to join the chat. You're more than welcome. Let me see if I do this correctly, if I can figure out how to use all this shit. And I think I could even pin that. Okay, if I did that correctly, that link should be pinned at the top of the screen or top of the chat for anybody who wants to join. If you guys have any questions about anything that I've discussed in any previous video, any questions for me personally, if you have anything you want to direct to Johnny, Please feel free.
Or are we done?
Unless you have anything else you want to add to that.
I was going to go over just a little bit of what 53 actually says, if we have time for it.
We do.
All right. Let's just go to 50. First, I want to say that 53:2 is what the nations are saying. Okay, so we talked about how for he grew up before him like a young plant, like a shoot, and like a root out of dry ground. Yeah, well, that's actually what the nations are saying, which is why Isaiah 51 through 53:1 says, "Who has believed what we have heard, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?" And then it starts into what the nations are now saying about the servant. And so if we go to then 53:4-6.
Okay.
It says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we consider him punished by God." First, before I finish the verse, I want to tell people the fact that Israel is referred to as a he and a him isn't anything really at all, because that's throughout the Old Testament. Hosea 11 calls Israel a son and a him, so it personifies Israel as if it was a guy, a man. So that's not anything. That's not anything. That's not a problem. It says, "Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions." It doesn't actually say pierced, it says wounded, but that's the English translations. "He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment and brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." So, first, this is the nation speaking about the servant. They initially believed that Israel was stricken by God and afflicted by God because of their own sins, but he was actually wounded by the other nations, especially during the exile. He was crushed by their iniquities. And because of Israel's redemption, we were reading the other chapter, because of Israel's redemption, their suffering that then led up to their redemption, right? Then the other nations are going to be led to God because of their redemption, and so the nations were the ones that were actually wounding Israel, so to speak. But because of Israel's redemption, the other nations are now going to be led to God, and this is the nations talking about it. They are seeing it, and they are saying they're basically saying we were wrong. Isaiah 53, 7-9.
7-9. Okay.
It says, "He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgressions of my people, and he was punished." That is actually correct, for the transgressions of my people. What translation is this one?
Ooh, I think we're so far, unless you've been reading off my screen, we've been using the same translation. It looks like it just defaulted to the NIV.
NIV actually got that right. Whoa. Okay, pretty cool. "For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth." So, the servant Israel is described as a lamb being led to slaughter. Even through the exile, the oppression, and even a lot of the Israelites being killed, Israel stayed loyal to God, didn't turn to violence, or give up its faith. Righteous Israelites were cut off from the land of the living and dumped in graves with the wicked ones. And the nations hadn't yet realized they were responsible, but they are now realizing it. The patient, nonviolent endurance through the exile and Israel's eventual redemption is what ends up shocking the nations into seeing their own guilt and finally recognizing Israel's God as being the one true God. This is why a lot of people think that there's a shift between just Israel and the righteous remnants, because 53, 7-9 doesn't sound like all of the Israelites. It sounds more specifically like the righteous remnant that is mentioned in Zephaniah 3:13. So it's more like the righteous remnants of Israel are being redeemed, and not just all of them. So that's it. That's the thing I wrote. So Isaiah 53 isn't about Jesus. It's not messianic. It's about the nation of Israel, and that's why it's a scholarly consensus. Because just plainly reading the text from all from chapters 40 to 55, very clearly about Israel. And so that's what I would recommend to any Christians that are in the chat today. Don't just listen to your church leaders. Go read it. Go read 40 to 55 and see what you think about it. Know the context and have fun reading.
Yeah, that's very well done, Johnny. Very comprehensive, and that's really good advice, because I found, having attended a lot of church services over the years, that they will pick and choose verses out of the Bible without giving actual context, which is ironic, because when you have discussions with believers, they constantly, anytime you cite a verse to prove that, you know, the God of the Bible is extremely immoral or something like that, then they'll yell at you about context. Oh, you gotta read the context. You gotta read the context. But then as soon as you pull out something that they don't like because the context proves that they're wrong, they completely ignore the context. It is such a strange, I don't even know. It's frustrating if you're actually trying to change people's minds, but you know, it's the nature of the beast, I guess.
Yeah, Christians tell me time and time again when I debate, context is key. Context is important. You can't cherry pick verses. But when I bring up Isaiah 53, when they bring up Isaiah 53, or I bring it up and I start telling them about the context, it's like they don't want it. It's like they try to ignore the context because it just proves the idea that this is about the nation of Israel and not Jesus. I said this at the beginning, but the intellectually honest position to take for a Christian, a Christian, is that the original context is about Israel, but there's also somehow a dual fulfillment. I would disagree with the idea that there can be a prophecy that has two fulfillments. One of them is within the context of the passage, and then another one is completely removed from the context, and there's no way, and we could just make it about anything. But that would at least be that would be better than just denying that it's about Israel.
I do want to introduce. Now, am I saying, is it Chris? Did I get that right? It is. Okay. I feel like I know 2 or 3 different Chris's. Yeah. My brother, I don't know if I mentioned this before on the channel or not, but I had a brother who passed away recently from a drug overdose, actually, and his name was Chris. So I see Chris's all over the place now. Yeah. But it's so good to see you, brother.
Hey man, what's going on? By the way, I'm going with Bionic simply because there's been times when there's like 3 Chris's in the room. Yeah. So I figured there's fewer Bionics, so we'll go with that. But yeah, you can call me Chris. You can I'm not gonna feel like you're dead naming me or anything. It's fine. Just Bionic is fine. So how's everybody? By the way, I was sitting there gaming, derping around, listening to this almost like as a podcast, and I remember I was just thinking like how easy it is if you really were intellectually curious to sit down and read it. And just to kind of really get like the Old Testament and some of the biblical, the historical side, I can't help but feel like church leaders, and this makes me sound like I'm wearing like a conspiracy theorist hat, they don't want people to do that.
No,
they
don't
want people, right? Because they frame it as like, oh, that's just historical, yada yada. You don't really need to know it. Just too long didn't read Jesus King, like they discourage that kind of dissection, almost vilifying it, and leaving it to the realms of like, why would you be looking for an answer? Like, why are you looking to pick it apart? So they almost like demonize it a little bit, which is what was my experience.
I feel like there's probably a decent amount of church leaders don't actually believe in it, and they're only doing their job. And the reason I think this, and it's because I know people who have actually gone to like Bible college and seminary, and it's caused them to realize that this just isn't true. The Bible just isn't true. Christianity is just not true. And I can't help but wonder how many of the church leaders pretend that they believe in it just so they can get paid for it, and they don't actually believe in it. For me, what made me not believe in it anymore is I started my deconversion pretty early on. I was probably like 16, something like that. I might have been I was 12 when I first started having some initial doubts, because there was an atheist in my at my school, and I couldn't fathom that. I couldn't fathom the idea that there was somebody who didn't believe in the Christian God. But he raised some good points. I didn't really think about them, but I mean, he actually did raise some good points. Probably about 16 when I first started getting like real opposition from atheists about the contradictions, errors, and stuff in the book. And I went and I started to read that for myself, and that's when I realized that they were right. The book is filled with contradictions and errors. For example, where did King Josiah die? King Josiah, there's two different stories as to how he died. One says he died in Megiddo. Another one says he died in Jerusalem. You can't die in two places. Somebody made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And then here pretty recently, maybe a year or two ago, no, it's probably about a year ago. Well, no, about 2 years ago, actually, now, I guess. I found Justin from the Construction Zone, and he started bringing up all these interesting points about how Jesus isn't the Messiah because he didn't actually fulfill any of the prophecies. The authors are just cherry-picking verses out of the Old Testament to claim he fulfilled them. And they misquote the Old Testament when they do so. Like, oftentimes they're misquoting it as well because they're not reading the Hebrew Bible. They're reading the Greek copies of it. They're reading... And so knowing a little bit, and Justin, you know, he actually went to Bible college and seminary, and he knows bits of the language. He knows bits of Hebrew and Greek. Well, he learned them, but he doesn't really go over them a lot. But he goes over them when necessary. And knowing the original language or knowing parts of it helps you realize that a lot of the English translations are blatantly lying to you. They have been translated in such a way that they reflect Jesus, because that's what the people who translated them want you to think. But when you actually know the meanings of the words in Hebrew and in the context and things like that, you know how the sentences are put together, you can very clearly see that that's just not the case. Like Isaiah 7:14, we went over this. There's no virgin in there. Ha'amahara means the pregnant young woman. There's no virgin in the text. It's just that Matthew is reading from the Greek Septuagint, where it uses a word that could mean either or, virgin or young woman. And in his time period, the word had shifted to meaning more virgin than it did young woman. At that point during his time period, it had pretty much almost exclusively shifted to just meaning virgin. So he's reading this and saying, virgin giving birth, that's got to be about Jesus. So he just cherry picks a verse out of there and says, yeah, that's about Jesus. But then we read context, and there's nothing about Jesus in there, and there's no virgin giving birth. He just made a mistake. But I have to believe to some capacity that the author of Matthew was also lying, because you can't read the context and then say, yeah, this is about Jesus. But and Justin has stated this numerous times, that there's kind of an inside joke with some scholars, which is that they call seminary cemetery because it's where faith goes to die. Because once you actually start learning about the religion, you start learning bits of the original language. I mean, a lot of these scholars know the original language. I'm just saying bits, but when you actually learn the original language, which I haven't, I've only learned bits and pieces of it. I'm still learning. I'm trying my best to learn from it. But when you know the original language and you know the context of the passages and everything, you can see that it's not true. It's just not true. It's an eye opener, because you're like, wow, I can't believe I actually believed this at one point. But they were lied to. They were told that this was true. They were hidden. Context was hidden from them, and they were discouraged from looking into it. So I think that's, to answer your question, I think that's why, thinking about it for yourself is often discouraged, because church. I'm sure there are some of the church leaders that do it just because they want you to not get sidetracked with all that. But I have to believe that a lot of them know that it's not true, and they're either coping with it, or they know, and they're just trying to get paid. And not to sound, I'm not trying to say that all of them are like that. I'm just saying that I'm sure a few of them are doing that because they got this degree and they want to get paid for what they're doing, and so they can't help but do whatever they can to keep you from thinking about it.
Right. And I've also gotten in encounters with, debate types. You know what I mean? I guess hobby apologists, like they use apologetics as a hobby.
Yeah.
And I think some of them, they almost treat it like a game. You know what I mean? Like it's a game of skill. How can they handle a challenge? And how skilled are they in rhetoric, or how skilled are they in flipping phrases, or muddying the waters so much that they look like they just did a mic drop when you really think about what they just said, like that made no sense. You know what I mean? I was talking to this guy, and I don't remember the exact exchange, but it was something along the lines of, he somehow tied, there was a prophecy about that a fire will be lit in the sky or something like that, right? And again, he's kind of like, in the old Greek, helios was used when when photos was used, and blah blah blah. He goes, and then when we look at this scripture about John the Baptist, the moment Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, there was a fire in the sky, and we know that because this word, and it really was just him doing 6 degrees of separation, and throwing words around, and even changing definitions on the fly. And after that, he felt very proud of himself because I knew he was full of crap. He knew he was full of crap. But in his worldview, he had done the thing. He had done the almost like a freestyle rap battle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I can't help wonder if apologetics was born out of the fact that people have to cope with this, and I mean, at least in some capacity. I'm sure a lot of the apologists believe what they're saying, but I can't help but wonder if there are at least a pretty decent portion of them who are just coping because they can't fathom that it's just not true. And I feel bad. I feel bad for that. I do. I feel bad for them because I know what it. I personally, because I was a Christian, so I personally know what it's like to find out that what you believed isn't true. And it hurts. It hurts.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to leave Christianity, but I had because I didn't believe in it anymore.
Right.
And also the moral issue as well. The moral issue with Christianity is just horrible. Not only I didn't want to leave originally, but once I started getting more into the moral arguments, I realized that the Christian evil anyways, so it wouldn't matter. I know what you mean. Because I actually just spoke to, he wasn't really an apologist. He tried to give me an apologetic. It didn't really go anywhere. But eventually I got him to just, maybe after really without any effort, I got him to admit that, Isaiah 7:14 doesn't actually fit Jesus. But I don't believe in God because of the Bible. I believe because of personal revelation. And I'm like, well, you're whatever you experienced, I can't experience that. So unfortunately, I can't use that as evidence because I can't experience it. I don't know what happened, but it is what it is. But
I also think influencer culture has almost made that even worse, because I think there's just people who see it as a cottage industry, as a way to get views and a way to kind of glob onto something. So it's even hard to have intellectual conversations with some people because you feel like you just smell the grift on them. And you realize that they're not doing it even for some intellectual or some theological pursuit, but because they know that there's money to be made or there's clicks to be had if they pile into that kind of like group or whatever. It's kind of a sad thing,
I'm not going to name drop, but Objective knows who I'm talking about. He shows no Christian qualities at all. He's a well-known apologist, a decent apologist. He's been doing it for like 10 years, and he gets cooked every time. But like 10 years, but I have to. But he shares no Christian qualities other than defending the book with nonsense apologetics. He doesn't show any of the qualities in Colossians 3:8 or 3:12. He's he's just a very rude individual. He's very I can't help but wonder if I know he believes in it, but I'm sure he's just doing it for the money. I don't think he actually really cares. I think he's just doing it for the money.
Yeah, it's sad.
It is really interesting, gentlemen, the things you guys are talking. First of all, before I get too far, I just want to mention to clear up, because I made a brief mention of it. So before this goes too far, but it was King Ahab was the king in the house of Omri that's mentioned in that Tell Dan Staley, along with the house of David. So if anybody watches this far into it, so just to tie back that. But what you guys are saying is really important, because this is actually something I've been starting to discuss on my channel. I've made brief mentions of it over the past several months on this channel and other channels why I do not actively try to deconvert people personally. And it has to do with the psychosis that is associated with a belief in something like a religious belief, like what we're talking about today. You find it in strong political beliefs and certain other beliefs that are tied to different cultures and stuff, but it has to do with the environment that, like Chris was saying, like Bionic was saying, that the environment people are raised in has a huge influence on these types of beliefs. But when you start to study the psychology, which I've been getting into more recently, of belief itself, it's fascinating that there's actually been studies that show there's different parts of the brain that activate or deactivate when it comes to our belief system. And there's another part of the brain that controls emotions. And that also ties into the activation, deactivation, and how we respond emotionally to what our brain is telling us to either believe or disbelieve. And when it comes to some of these religious beliefs, and again, you see this in politics and other areas of life, but in particular for today's context, when you see these religious beliefs, the parts of the brain that normally control belief and disbelief actually switch off, just like it happens in your sleep. So when you're sleeping, you can dream about some crazy shit, right, that you would never accept in real life, because when you're in your awakened state, your alert state, your mind has a natural process that says, no, you can't fly, You're not a superhero. You can't, whatever it is you're dreaming about, that you're suddenly able to do, your mind shuts that off when you're awake, because automatically that this isn't happening. But when you're asleep, it shuts that off, so that, because otherwise what would happen is every time you try to do something crazy in one of your dreams, like flying, for example, your mind would wake you up and say, no, you can't do this. So the brain actually shuts this mechanism off. That same mechanism actually turns off when it comes to these beliefs that people hold. And so it's really fascinating. So when you're trying to talk somebody out of an irrational belief, you'll find that when you deal with people who, basically what happens is people start doubling down, and they really are even more determined to believe it's true. This is a defense mechanism that's happening inside the brain, which is why it seems like sometimes when you bring attention to something like slavery in the Bible, or some of the obvious shit that should just tell people, oh man, this stuff's really fucked up, people absolutely have to scramble to justify this or to figure it out. And if they can't, then they will default to something like, God's ways are higher than our ways. We can't understand, but God has to be good in all scenarios, whether God is saving people or whether God is killing babies. God is the good guy no matter what. And even if they can't articulate it, their mind is telling them, no, stop. This is you're going into a dangerous territory right now. You can't accept this. You can't deal with it. And it's happening in real time. And you can see it, especially if you either are online with somebody and they have their camera going, or if you're talking face to face, you can see it in their eyes that they're freaking out internally, And so it could be dangerous actually, because you start to crush, if you start to force people to accept reality, they oftentimes do not respond well,
That's why deconstruction is often a gradual process, because people often don't just immediately wake up from, they don't just immediately accept it. It takes them some time. And you also have no idea what somebody has gone through that's made them religious. They could have gone through some trauma or something that forced them, well, not forced them, but it caused them to adopt this belief. So it's and I regrettably didn't really think about this before, but now, objective got me to start thinking about this. But you have no idea what somebody has gone through that has made them religious. We need to try our best to support them the best we can, to help them see that this isn't true, when we're talking about it, instead of just trying to force them to accept it. We need to try to be patient with them, try to support them and help them see what's going on, instead of just trying to force them to accept it, because that's not going to happen, and that's going to do more harm than it does good.
I mean, I'm also the first to admit that I was, just real quick about my deconversion is, I almost came from the opposite end, where I grew up in I'm not going to say a skeptical household, but I grew up in a household where it was very much like we were encouraged to be open-minded and to explore the world and see what makes sense and what, doesn't. It's kind of a non-traditional upbringing. So even my religiosity always felt like a choice. It always felt like a buy-in, right? Because for me, when I started getting involved in the church, I was fully aware that I was doing it partially because of the emotional appeal of it, but also because it gave me a sense of community. So so those challenges to my belief, it didn't hit my dopamine, serotonin levels. You know what I mean? It didn't hit the way it might have hit for other people. So it was easier for me to walk away, simply because I wasn't as deeply rooted in my identity with it, right? I mean, again, not going throughout the full, history of it. So I'm fully aware of that when I approach people who I see in them, that this is their identity. This is dinner with grandma. This is their communities. This is their jobs. Some of them, there's some people I talk to that the idea of not being a Christian is like, it's like alien to them, because their parents were Christian of that denomination, their boss is a Christian of that denomination, their community, everything is tied into that. So you ask that person to start to question their fundamental belief system. It's basically asking a person to like question or deconvert from their identity, in essence, because it's so intertwined and so psychologically ingrained in them, and so socially and emotionally and intellectually ingrained in them, that you're really, I think I use the analogy of like, when you see a tree growing around a fence, you can't just pull that fence out without kind of destroying the tree a little bit, if you can get the imagery of it. So I'm very sympathetic to that. Even for me, when it's like common sense, like just open your eyes and look, I understand that that's not easy for some people, because you're really asking a lot.
Yeah.
it's a huge commitment that people buy into in many cases, and the social aspect of it is huge. You know, so many people that grow up in religious households, their families are tied to it, and their friendships they build. You know, they go to the youth group, they grow up with these kids. They all go to the same church, so there's a massive social element. And I mean, nobody wants to just basically like think about losing all the friendships that they've invested years into, because when we invest in other people, it requires, we have to basically break down some barriers and let people into our lives, which makes us very vulnerable. And we, as human beings, that makes us very uncomfortable. So once we've decided to let a certain group of people or individuals into our lives, into this vulnerable place, we're very exposed. And the thought of turning your back on these people or on a commonly shared belief becomes very frightening. And there's the other element that, there's some fundamental questions they ask in philosophy, and religion really helps to give people peace of mind with three of the fundamental questions, which is, where did we come from? What's the purpose in life? And where do we go after death, right? Those are three fundamental questions that pretty much every single human being, even people that we would consider to be shallow, quote unquote, or not deep thinker, even these people consider those three questions at some point in their lifetime. Where did I come from? What am I doing here? And where am I going? So for myself, having lived such an insane, crazy lifestyle when I was younger, having tasted death, literally, I've come to peace with the idea of life and death. So I don't worry at all about where I'm going. And it's not because I'm some kind of tough guy or something like that. It's just that I've been there. I've been at death's doorstep, and I'm still here to talk about it. So at some point you just realize that, this is the life we have, and death is inevitable. And when it does come, I want to die well. That's really important, to die with a peaceful heart, peaceful mind. And for me, I don't need religious beliefs to be at peace, because I didn't have them when I was facing death, and I don't need them now. But I talked to somebody just last night, actually, who was talking about her fear of death and how she's really uncomfortable with the idea that just dying sounds like it sucks. Like, that's very frightening to her. And I know that this is a very common thing with people, the thought of not existing anymore. And so the religious beliefs that she says, even if it's not true, it makes me feel better knowing that believing that I'm going to go somewhere after I die. And I can totally respect where she's coming from. And I didn't push back whatsoever on that, because there's no need to, there's no need to. My thing with religion, I'm kind of I'm in an interesting place. Johnny, I'm really, really grateful when you mentioned that hearing me talk about the deconversion, why I do or don't do that, and how that impacted you and what I feel is a positive way, because that's what I'm really trying to do with this channel. But with my particular views, not being politically affiliated and really trying to extend the olive branch to people I disagree with, what I'm really doing is setting myself up just to piss everybody off at some point. That's, and I recognize that. I'm surprised I haven't gotten more pushback than I have from both sides of the community, the atheist and the theist, because I will say some things that the atheist is right on board with as a fellow skeptic, but then I'll say something like, we shouldn't actively deconvert people, or, whatever. And then it'll be like, what the hell's wrong with you? You know what I mean? So the same thing with the theistic side, as soon as I start bringing up like failed prophecies, all of my friends who are believers, they're like, oh my God, you're going to go to hell or whatever. But the truth is, I do feel like the best thing that we can do is actually celebrate our differences, because diversity is extremely important. So to just try to talk everybody out of the things they already believe isn't necessarily even a good idea, in my opinion, because we need people pushing back on our ideas. That's how we can test our ideas and figure out if what we think is actually viable or not, and diversity leads to a lot of other areas like culture, diversity in art, and the scientific advancements need diversity. If we all agreed on everything, we would make no advancements in science, right? So we need diversity. So trying to get everybody to believe the same things is not productive. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think the most important thing, though, there are some fundamental things I do believe that we should all agree on, and that's what I'm trying to do with this channel. And that's to recognize the humanity that we all share, right? We're all trying to put food on our plate. We all need a coat on our back and a roof over our heads. We all want to take care of our families and things of this nature, maybe make a little money along the way. So if we could focus on the stuff that we have in common and celebrate the fact that we're going to have different ideas and allow these different ideas to come in to the arena so that we can all consider them, because there's going to be things that I guarantee that I'm wrong about. I know it because I'm a human being, for one thing. And so if it wasn't for other people exposing me to different ideas, and it wasn't for the fact that I'm open to consider these ideas, then I would just be stuck in my own dogmas at that point. So I really try to encourage that.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like, my main goal isn't to deconvert anyone. If they do because of what I say, okay, I guess that's good. I guess that's okay. That's a good thing, from at least in my opinion, because it's, if it helps them, then. But that's not my goal. My main goal is to just shine light on on the fact that Christianity just isn't true. It's just it's talk about it and to go into detail on it.
Can I just take 1 second? I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to recognize we've got Tilting Windmill. I think this might be one of the first times I've seen Tilting Windmill catch us live, and I just want to give a shout out to Tilting Windmill. And I don't want to embarrass you, my friend, but Tilting Windmill is the most phenomenal mod. If any of you guys have come across Tilting Windmill mods on quite a few channels, actually, I know mostly from Captive Desk, which is a great channel. I highly recommend checking out the Captive Desk show. Dave, I believe is the gentleman's name. But I've seen Tilting Windmill on like James Apperson's channel, another gentleman who I really like, and one of the most friendly people from the skeptic community that I've ever engaged with. He's so nice, always has something nice to say. When I first started doing this whole YouTube thing, I didn't have my own channel. I was just catching other people's channels. And I was at the end of my medical problems before my final surgery. And I was, oh my God, I was having so much pain, so much just misery, just physically, because of my medical problems. And Tilting Windmill was so sympathetic and empathetic, and always it just made my day whenever I would come across this person. So Tilting Windmill, I'm sorry, I don't mean to embarrass you, but I just want to give you a shout out. You really do set an example as a human being that we could all follow. So I'm so honored that you would catch this stream. Thank you so much. And if you want to join, I don't think I've ever seen you jump on a platform before, but if you feel like jumping on, anybody is welcome. And again, just to make it clear, there's a lot of stuff that I talk about that's very divisive, and I try to bring that to the table on purpose because I really want people to be able to talk about things that make other people uncomfortable. I want to do it in a way to show people we can have disagreements respectfully. And so please, if there's anything that I've said or a video that I've put out or anything that I've talked about that you guys think is wrong, or you think I'm full of shit, or whatever the issue is, feel free to come and question me about it, because maybe I was wrong. Maybe you can give me an argument that will change my mind. And so I just really encourage everyone to put their ideas out there and to be willing to be exposed like that, to have the confidence that irregardless of how things are being presented, you have to have enough self-esteem to not let words hurt your feelings. And I know that can be difficult. It's easy to say, but it's tough to do. But if you could get to a point to where you have enough confidence in yourself as a human being that you're doing the best job that you can to live an ethical life and to show other people respect, even if you disagree with their ideas, then the things that people say, the criticisms people have, don't hurt that much. I promise you, have a thicker skin, and then you can really take a chance to be exposed to things that you might need to hear. So I'm sorry, Johnny, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say hello to Tilting. So please continue.
If you want to come on up. I know you said you don't really talk, but if you want to come up, we're not gonna have a problem with it. You're fine. So deconverting people isn't necessarily my goal. I consider it a plus if it actually ends up getting them to deconvert, but that's not my goal. My goal is just to shine light on Christianity and why it's not true. Because I think I think in general Christianity has just been a net negative, in my opinion. And I think it's important to know that it is also just built on plain lies, because the whole Judaism aside, because Christianity is built on Judaism, but Christianity itself is built on lies about Judaism. It's built on lying about the Old Testament, cherry picking verses out of it, and also the fact that Jesus supposedly fulfilled all these prophecies that they're then just cherry picking out of the Bible to claim he fulfilled. So Christianity is just built on lies, and I think it's important to go over that and explain that to people and show them how. If it ends up with them deconverting, I consider that a plus. But That's not my goal. My goal isn't to make them deconvert. And I also have to keep in mind that they might be going through something, or they might have gone through something that put them into the religion in the first place. And I don't need to poke and prod at that. I need to be respectful, and I need to help them in any way I can. And I need to support them through whatever has been going on with them. So
it's funny. I had a conversation with someone who, we were in the middle of in the debate, and they were like, "Well, why do you care that I'm a Christian?" I said, "I don't. I don't care that you're a Christian. I care that you're a Christian nationalist. I care that you're dogmatic in your thinking. I care that you're a bigot and you wrap yourself in scripture to do that. I care because you're anti-science in the name of God. So understand, it's not your Christianity. Believe what you want, whatever gets you through the day. I don't even judge that, because believe me, we all have our superstitions. But when it becomes my business is when you kind of use your religiosity or you use your faith as an excuse to participate in civil society with the rest of us. It's when you say, because this book said so, I now feel a sense of superiority over this population or that population, or I'm gonna celebrate public executions. Like, how the hell, where do you get that from your Christianity? And it really does take a lot of backflips to get there, but you found a way to do it. That's where I have the beef. So for me, it's not about deconverting Christians. It's kind of talking back at the people who are trying to hide behind their Christianity to be shitty people.
Right?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I am absolutely on the same page with you, brother. This is the thing that I do actively try to address with people is, okay, have your beliefs, and I could even support your beliefs. I could even talk about the beautiful things that I see, depending on what religion you're talking about, because I do see a lot of beautiful things. There's some wonderful poetry, wisdom literature. It makes history fun when you do comparative history. So there's just a lot of things I can say about religion. In fact, I think I mentioned this before, and I haven't looked into the studies recently, but the last time I did actual research into this, it was something like over 85% of all the nonprofit efforts that are done worldwide are actually done by religious groups. And we could probably say that even though there are some quote unquote secular groups that do human outreach and stuff like that, nonprofit work, there's a lot of religious people that are involved in those secular groups. The group itself is not religious, but so without religion, I wonder how charitable people would actually be. And I hate to think like that, because I do like to promote secular humanism. But, in fact, I don't know if Dan, Dr. Norton or Mr. Norton, I'm not sure if he's doctor, but we had a professor who stopped by. He's going to be a guest on my show, and he's really into Ayn Rand's philosophy. And he has some very interesting takes because of the objective moral stance that Ayn Rand presents, with coercion being a major problem. And I agree that coercion is a problem. However, he's against, and I don't want to misrepresent, so if I'm saying this wrong, incorrectly, he'll be able to correct me when we do our show together. But as far as I understand, he's against taxation, because taxation is a form of coercion, which I do agree with to a certain degree. It is a form of coercion. Paying your taxes or go to jail is obviously a form of coercion. But if we didn't mandate taxes, would people, out of generosity or out of concern for other people, donate to public services like the utilities, right? Water, sewer, electricity, police, things of this nature? I'm really skeptical that they would, to be honest with you. And I hate to be pessimistic like that, because I'd like to think that we are all ultimately concerned about the well-being of others, but I don't know that that's what I'm seeing yet. I don't think we've quite got there as people in general. I think there are some individuals who would be very generous, don't get me wrong, but would people just voluntarily give money, to support resources like public transportation? If they've got a nice Mercedes, are they going to be motivated enough to help other people get to work? I'm just curious. I'm skeptical about that.
It's funny. Just real quick, I never felt more socialist than I did when I was driving down I-78 and I saw the salt spreaders and the plows. After we got that storm, I was like, oh, thank God for the government. And I wonder how many people who bitch and complain about taxes, or bitch and complain about like government, too big of a government, were also grateful to see the public service come in and make that road safer for them to get home safe. You know what I mean? Again, that's not an advertisement for socialism, but I just find it funny that people are ultimately self-serving, even in their, it's a variation of the there's no atheist in the foxholes type thing, where I think people, they claim to be rugged individualists, but I think we all rely on collectivism a lot more than we sometimes acknowledge. To the point about that kind of like the taxation and all that stuff. And anyway, sorry, small diversion, but yeah.
Yes.
There's something to be said for that. In fact, I'm speaking back of Ayn Rand,
Right.
and I'm just starting to get into her philosophy. I'm doing that actually specifically because I came across Mr. Norton's channel, and I had Schopenhauer next on the list because he was recommended by somebody else. But when I started listening to Mr. Norton talk about Ayn Rand, I bumped Schopenhauer down so I could get into some Ayn Rand. My time is so limited. If I was infinitely wealthy, I would spend a lot of time just literally just studying. I'd probably go back to college, believe it or not, just for fun. But there's something she talks about called egoism, and it's really interesting because if anybody has ever looked into deontology, the idea of the motivation to our actions, as opposed to the outcome of our actions, and it's almost inconsequential in one way. Or do we do good things to serve ourselves, or do we do good things just because they're good things to do? You know what I mean? Like ultimately at the end of the day, if we're doing good things, does that even matter? I don't know that it does, because it's undeniable that the best thing you can do for yourself is invest in the community around you. Really. You know what I mean? Because you're going to eventually, your health is going to fail. Some random shit's going to happen, and you are going to need other people. We are a social species. So if you're completely self-centered and you don't care about anybody else, and all you're doing is trying to serve yourself, your life is going to be very empty and very unstable. But if you build in the community that's around you, then you ultimately are serving yourself in doing so. It's kind of an interesting, I think it's the Euthyphro dilemma that Socrates talked about, right?
Yeah. So, yeah. So, by the way, I'll also use this as an opportunity. I hope I'm not monopolizing the conversation. For something I wanted to ask you about objective is that, like, you kind of pride yourself on being able to have conversations with people who you would otherwise disagree with, and you kind of pride yourself on someone who's able to kind of go into the lion's den, so to speak, right? But my only question is, and this is a genuine question, this isn't a gotcha, do you really think that as well as you got along with, let's say, Gothics, right, who I have like no respect for, by the way, do you think whatever that common ground was mattered at the end of the day? Or do you think she just kind of used you in that moment to kind of show that maybe there's a soft side, but then she went right back to her grift 10 minutes after you guys ended that thing? So my question is, it's the tolerance paradox. Like, how much intolerance do you tolerate in the name of tolerance? And that's not a rhetorical. I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I really appreciate it, because it is, I do have the advantage of having been to hell and back, and I don't recommend people go that route because you don't always come back. But having seen the darkest side of things and being able to really understand, why people are suicidal, why people have drug and alcohol addictions, why people are dogmatic and hold on to very illogical views and stuff. It comes across in the way that I deal with people. True empathy does actually reflect. And so that does help break a lot of barriers. The other thing that helps me a lot is the self-confidence that I talked about. As much as I do want to do the right thing by other people, I don't lose any sleep over the fact that there are going to be people who reject me. It's just, and again, it's not like because I'm some kind of sage or some kind of tough guy or something like that. It's just because I've had real problems in life, real problems. And so these types of things just don't affect me because they're just not serious. Now other people are going to be more sensitive because they haven't experienced the things that I've experienced. And so they're going to be more impactful to people. So I'm not trying to minimize the effect that it can have on people. I do understand, but I do have that advantage in that, I've been there and done that. And the other thing is that I'm sincere, and most people can recognize that, just because you can, it's however we do that, we can tell when people are basically bullshitting us or when they're sincere and they mean what they say. And ultimately where I'm coming from is from a place of love and respect. I do believe the dumb shit that comes out of my mouth, as crazy as it might sound about making the world a better place and stuff like that. I actually believe that we have a responsibility. Without any religious beliefs whatsoever, I believe that the reason that we're here as individuals, if there's a purpose in life, is actually to make the world a better place. And that includes taking care of the planet. It's not just taking care of each other. You know, I do believe that that's part of our responsibility, so to speak, quote unquote. But so all these things put together does help me. It gives me a lot of tools to work with to be successful when I engage with other people. But one thing I've come to learn from listening to other people online and stuff like that is that oftentimes the way that we can accomplish our goal in changing minds is not going to be with the person you're speaking to directly necessarily. It's more that you have the platform with social media to where I can have this conversation with you guys. Somebody else might watch this video and something will strike them. Like even what Johnny said earlier, and he really humbled me actually and made me, you know, really think, wow, this is exactly what I was hoping for. Is he mentioned something that hearing me talk about the dangers of deconverting people and why I don't actively do has affected him to where now he still wants to promote good thinking and right thinking and promote science and really point out, you know, problematic areas, especially when it comes to ethics and stuff with religion. And I appreciate that. I respect that. And I'm on the same page with him. But his approach to the situation has softened because of something that he heard me say. This is somebody might hear something that Johnny says, or somebody might hear something that you say on this platform, and that may stick with them. We will never know. We'll have no way of knowing that. The chances of somebody reaching out to us and saying, hey, listen, something you said really made a difference for me. But I know that this does happen. And so that is really the reason that I will get on platforms like Gothix, for example. I don't think I'm going to change her mind necessarily. It could happen, but it's not going to happen in real time. That's the other thing too, is we're trying to plant seeds. So when you have a conversation with somebody, I don't expect them to look at me and say, oh my gosh, you know what? You just dismantled my worldview. I'm going to start right now from the ground up and rebuild it. No one's going to tell me that to my face, but it might happen. That might be one seed that gets planted that eventually starts to grow into something that's really beautiful. So that's what I think. And I can't prove any of that, but that's my feeling.
We also have civil disagreement happening in the comments.
Yeah.
I agree though. Like, I'm sure that at least what I do has made people think, and I'm happy with that. I'm happy with knowing that I have at least made people think about what I'm saying, whether it actually does, like whether it actually sticks with them or not. I don't know, but I know that I have at least made people think about it, and that's good enough for me. So.
Or maybe I've just been tainted. I'm not going to use the word tainted, but maybe I'm also very mindful of the times that I've gone into good faith conversations with people or tried to have conversations, and I realize that I'm kind of wearing my heart on my sleeves, and I'm kind of trying to be genuine and authentic, and what I'm getting from them is talking points. And when everything is said and done, I realize maybe halfway through the conversation, I'm trying to have a conversation, they're trying to win a debate. And I think maybe that makes you a little cynical at times, you know what I mean?
No, and that's fair, because like whenever you talk with somebody, whenever you debate with somebody, because it's always going to be a debate when you have when you're going up against somebody and you both have two conflicting ideas and you're trying to discuss why you're right and the other person isn't. It's always going to be a debate, but at least it could be a good faith discussion where you both actually explain your positions and actually have a good talk about it. But there's always going to be that dishonest interlocutor. I probably didn't say that word correctly.
Yeah, that's true.
That there's always going to be that person who isn't going to argue honestly, and they're going to just not have a good faith conversation with you, whether they actually lie, or whether they like make all kinds of fallacies. And I've made my fair share of fallacies, and I've gone back and recognized that I did, and then I try to avoid that in the future because that's never my intention. Or whether they're just trying to win and they don't actually want to think about what's being said. There's always going to be people like that. You just have to kind of go with it. You have to just do your best to explain your position, why you think you're right. And if they're not gonna really think about it, that's their decision. You can only do what you got to do. What's that old saying? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right?
Yeah. And I think it's also, like I said before, maybe the influencer culture or the online culture thing for me has also made me, kind of think it, because again, when I first started, I would get into conversations with people. I'd be always being in the comments thinking, all right, maybe just let me offer them a different perspective. Let me offer them, maybe a more empathetic thing, only to find out that they were just being performative in their debate. And 9 times out of 10, he really didn't. They didn't even care. They just
Yeah.
wanted to put on that performance. They just wanted to play to the crowd. And I look like the bozo because I'm taking this seriously. You know what I mean? It's a weird dynamic to get into, especially like I said, when you're engaging with people like Gothics who are actively, in my view, actively destructive to social cohesion, has made a career of being kind of a diet Candace Owens, and as will never, for financial reasons, cannot change her mind simply
Yeah.
because she has a built-in audience that's relying on her to dunk on the liberal or relying on her to keep it real or be based.
Yeah.
For me, conversations like that, all you're doing is feeding that machine. It's not really changing minds, in my view. And maybe again, maybe that's where objective is more evolved than I am.
Yeah.
But I don't see I don't see the fruit of that labor at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Experience like this where it was pretty recent. I mean, it was last year now, but it was pretty
Mhm.
recent where in G-Man I said it, damn it, I accidentally did it. Okay. Well, Objective knows who it is. I'm gonna not name drop again. I accidentally did, but Objective knows who I'm talking about. Hopefully the audience didn't hear who I said I was talking about, but
I missed
I got
it.
I got the impression that he really wasn't being honest. I mean, he straight up lied about what Isaiah 49:3 said. I think it was 49:3, and he just blatantly lied about it. Just kept lying about it, and that's when I was like, you know what, I'm out. I'm done. Because if you're gonna keep lying to me, I don't like that. But I got the feeling throughout the entire debate, both debates we did, because one of them was I came up on his show. The other was we actually had a somewhat formal debate. Although he completely lied about whether there was going to be, he told me there was going to be a moderator, and then and then the day of the debate, he told me he asked my friend to do the debate. Well, I asked her about it. He never even reached out to her. He said he did, but he didn't.
Right.
So I got the
Yeah.
feeling during both of our debates that he wasn't an honest interlocutor.
Mhm.
I'm gonna never be able to say that word. He just wanted to try to win a debate. He didn't actually want to listen to what was being said. He just wanted to win a debate, and it just made him look really dishonest. And that's his reputation, not mine.
Sure. Gotcha.
I just take a quick second and introduce this gentleman. This is Dan Norton. Now, do I call you Dr. Norton, or is that not?
Well, I am a doctor, but you can just call me Dan.
Dan. Okay, very good. Very good. Dan, as I mentioned before, I came across his channel. It's only been a couple of weeks now. We had a really nice conversation. He was going to convert me from atheism, or from my agnostic position to atheism. I don't think we quite got that far, but we did a great job of showing how important it is to define terms so that you can have a productive conversation. And that's something that I really encourage when we're talking about having these debates or discussions with people. Excuse me. If you don't take the time to invest in what I call active listening, if you're only listening to respond, then you're not really listening, right? You're not really taking in what the other person's saying. And so if you take time to really listen to what the other person is saying, and what I've found is a really good technique is trying to steel man their position. So listen to what they say, acknowledge and say, listen, I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So I'm going to attempt to steel man your position here, and then let me know if I'm getting something wrong. And this breaks down a lot of barriers. I found that to be a very good communication technique if you're trying to ultimately have a productive conversation with somebody. If you're just having a debate to win a debate, do whatever you're going to do. But if you're actually trying to get people to consider the things you're saying, you have to let them know that you're listening to what they're saying. It's a two-way street, right? You're kind of setting that example in the middle of that conversation. And Dan and I did a great job of that. We were really just, asking each other, okay, this is the word that we're using. What definition are we both understanding when we use this word? And we hammered that down before we went into the next word, and so it was really great. And I just really think that people watching that conversation could learn a lot from how to communicate with other people. So I appreciated Dan. He mentioned a lot he does on his channel, which I will be putting a link to your channel in the description of this video, brother. After I've posted it and everything, I have to go back and do it afterwards, but I will do that for anybody who wants to follow up with that. But he talks about Ayn Rand, and that got me, as I mentioned when he was off screen, that bumped that Ayn Rand up the list. So I started looking into that, and I've been very intrigued. There's a lot of stuff that she says I actually do agree with. I find it to be a very interesting philosophical model, and there's questions I have, but we'll get into that when you come onto my channel. Is that supposed to be next week, or is it the 25th?
25th is the date
We're
you had
scheduled the
mentioned.
25th. That's right. I've got Tavo San Aubrey, if I'm saying his name correctly. He's a theist, and we're going to be doing a discussion next week about comparative theology, which I'm really looking forward to. I am trying to platform everybody, frankly, that I can on this channel, because I do want opposing views to be expressed. And like I said, this is a place where people can come to have their disagreements. So I'm trying to get more theists to come on the channel, because I've got a lot of atheist, agnostic, type skeptic content right now, which I'm happy to have opinions from anybody. But I want to make sure that every voice is being heard. And I've been interacting with a lot of theists on different social media platforms. And so I'm trying to encourage them to come over here and express their views, because it's one thing I've found that's fascinating is when you can break down barriers and communicate with people in a non-threatening way. So many of the people that I interact with are religious for all the right reasons. Believe it or not, they're looking for community. They're trying to figure out the answer to some of the tough questions, and they recognize problematic areas when it comes to the ethics and stuff, because I'm absolutely on the same page with Bionic, what he said. And I'm really glad he brought that up. The part about religion that I'm trying to deconstruct people from is the unethical stuff, right? The justification of the bigotry, for example, the misogyny. That's one of the biggest problems that I personally have. Bigotry is a problem, but you don't see a lot of that promoted in religion. That's really what people just take into their own, from their own other influences from their culture and their other environment. But what you do see promoted actively in many of these religious texts is misogyny. And I personally have a great deal of respect for women. My wife in particular has been phenomenal. I talked about my medical problems. There was almost 2 years where I was literally either in the hospital or stuck on the couch. And normally in our relationship, I take a lot of pride in the fact that we have a very supportive system where we share chores around the house. We share cooking duties, domestic stuff, I guess it would be called, right? And I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even feed myself hardly. And she has a really good job at the hospital, but it's extremely stressful for anybody who knows how the medical industry works. You take something like the hospital, the medical industry is crazy because there's a huge corporate side to it. So you've got all the bullshit that comes from being in the corporate world. And then you have the whole medical side of the scientific side and stuff. And you're trying to help people at the same time. So it's very stressful. And she goes to this stressful day at work. She's in management, so she's got a lot of bullshit she has to deal with. Then she has to come home, do all the house chores, and we have a very high standard for cleanliness around my house. We both have OCD, my wife and I do, and so she's cleaning the house, then she's cooking the meals. I mean, I felt so bad, but I literally physically couldn't do anything to help. I was fucked. And so it was her strength that carried our household for almost 2 years, and so very grateful to her for that. Prior to that, for people who know my life, it was very rocky. I came from a very dark place. When I was dating my wife, she's got her good job at the hospital. She's this saint who's never done anything wrong in her entire life. And I was working at strip clubs as a bouncer, right? Working around all these escorts. And I got into the adult industry. I mean, I was living a completely different life. And she stuck with me through all that. I was fucking around with drugs and alcohol. I was getting arrested for high-speed police chases, sitting in jail cells, trying to figure out how I'd fucked my life so bad. And my wife stuck by me through that entire thing. So I have a great deal of respect for women and a great deal of appreciation for them. And when I see the way that women get treated in religious circles, they get minimized. Their role is they're supposed to be, baby makers, essentially, is what they get reduced down to. And I'm just like, this is so fucked. And it does piss me off. So the things I try to deconvert people from are not their religious beliefs as far as, is there an afterlife? Did we get created out of whatever? I don't care about all that shit, really. It's the ethical stuff. That's the stuff that I have an issue with. So I just went on a tangent there. I don't know how I did that. So sorry. But Dan, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Dan. I think you've done a lot of the intro already. So I run a YouTube channel. It's at Dan Norton 1 if you want to check it out. And I appreciate you you said you're going to put a link there. Thank you for that. And I had a really good chat with Objective Ethics a couple of shows ago. I live stream once every 5 days. So my last stream was a couple days ago. So I plan to stream again in 3 days. And I've got an open line, so anyone can call in at any time. I don't use StreamYard, I use Zoom. So the setup is a little bit different, but I put a link in the chat and I pin it there. So all you have to do to call in is click that link. Or there's also a phone number you can dial. If for whatever reason you don't want to use the link, you can just dial up on a regular phone and then enter a meeting ID, which is given in the chat. So I promote Ayn Rand's philosophy, which just in a nutshell, she stands for reason, egoism, and capitalism. And some of those terms are controversial as to what they even mean. Like in particular, egoism, selfishness. She talks about selfishness a lot. She has a book called The Virtue of Selfishness, which I think is intentionally probably trying to be provocative. But the subtitle of the book is A New Concept of Egoism. So the stereotypical or conventional idea of what it means to be selfish is you're a rude jerk. You don't give a damn about others. You trample over other people's rights. You lie, you cheat, you steal to get whatever you want. But she flips that view on its head and says that's actually a self-destructive view. So if you act in these sorts of ways, then it's not really in your self-interest. You mentioned drugs and alcohol. I don't know, maybe you would testify to this view that if you act in certain ways, which might stereotypically be thought of as selfish, if you actually consider the long run consequences on your life, you might find that these sorts of behaviors, which are called selfish, are actually self-destructive. Just to give an example, I sometimes give, like, if I'm a rude jerk to you, then are you going to want to be my friend? Well, probably not. Well, then I've just lost out on a opportunity to have a friendship or a business partner or whatever. So if you act in these stereotypically selfish ways and then they come back to bite you and destroy your life and take opportunities away from you, they're actually not self-interested. So you might ask, well, are these really selfish behaviors, or are they kind of pseudo-selfish or self-destructive? So she has a radical view of ethics and morality, and also on politics. We're starting to get into that in the chat some. You might have seen I was having a debate with Tilting Windmills about coercion and whether things could be, whether it's greedy to pursue profit, is profit bad? And that's the point where I guess I stopped debating because I transitioned to coming on this panel. But anyways, I talk a lot about egoism and capitalism on my channel and what they actually mean, as opposed to mischaracterizations or straw men. Like a lot of people will say today's United States is a capitalist country. And I would say, no, we are far from a capitalist country. We have way too much government intervention to rightfully call it that. Like in a truly capitalist society, we wouldn't have massive government programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public education, public roads, all the alphabet agencies, the FEC, SEC, FDA, FAA, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say we are a far cry from what true capitalism is. And if we had true capitalism, I think we would be much better off. But that's a whole discussion. That's many discussions. And I've gone on for a long time already. So I'm just going to pause there.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I just real quick, we'll turn it over to just open it up. So everybody feel free to chime in when you want. I'm going to heat up a cup of coffee. But did you want to touch on what we have been discussing with the deconversion? Because I know that you do. It looks like you set your channel. And I've only watched a few of your videos, so maybe I'm misspeaking here, but I'm under the impression that you actually do open up for debate regarding religion, deconversion, things of that nature. Is that true?
Yeah, I don't really think of it in those terms, like deconversion, but I guess I'm open to that. Like I had a religious person call in my last show. He's Mormon, and we were debating a little bit on what faith means. So it's, I guess if a religious person or someone who disagrees with me on anything, it doesn't have to be religion. If you're a socialist, if you're an altruist, I'll debate with you, and I'll take the egoist position against the altruist. And I'll take the capitalist position against the socialist. So I'm happy to have a debate with pretty much anyone as long as it's civil. I don't like to have nasty conversations where people are just slinging insults and ad hominems against each other. But yeah, as long as it's civil, I'm happy to have a discussion or a debates. And if that leads to deconversion, fine. I'm here to promote the truth, at least what I think is the truth. And I hope others will find some value in that. So I guess I do have a persuasive goal in mind with my channel. I want to expose people to Ayn Rand's ideas, a new set of ideas, perhaps for them, because I think they're great and they make a lot of sense to me. And if other people find value in those ideas as well, then great. But if you disagree, that's fine too. The most important thing, I think, is the truth, not allegiance to a particular person or individual. So I might have little disagreements here and there with Ayn Rand. For the most part, I think I'm on board with her. I do have little quibbles about some things, but the essence of her philosophy, the major points of it, I think are true and important. But if someone wants to try to persuade me otherwise, then I'm happy to have a conversation about it.
Well, I mean, I'll say again, I know very little of Ayn Rand, and I guess my only entry point is comparing what I kind of think I understand about. I'll put it like this: some of my criticisms of what capitalism has become, and the example I use is like, I think when we all hear capitalism, the way we're taught it is the lemonade stand. You do remember that game, Lemonade Stand? It was like a computer game we played where you spend a certain amount of money, you buy a certain amount of lemons, a certain amount of ice, a certain amount of sugar, and you play with the recipe. And if more people buy your lemonade, then you can afford to buy more supplies. Do you remember that game at all, mate?
I don't think I ever heard of that game.
So there's a game called Lemonade Stand, or sometimes they have the apple cart, whatever. It's the supply, demand, kind of like once a company or an individual makes that profit, they reinvest that profit into expanding their business into a point where theoretically, the more money, the more successful a company is, the more that they can afford to pay their workers, the more they can kind of improve the quality of their product. And that's the idealized version of what capitalism is supposed to be, that the money you make from the community goes back into the community. My main criticism about what capitalism has become, it's get as much money as you can, pay your workers as little as possible, diminish the product and pay as little as you can, all in the name of profit. Now, if you want to argue that profit is a great motivator, then unfortunately, if that's the case, then you need a government to step in and say, no, you cannot pollute the lake. No, you cannot, put plastics in your baby food. And so it's kind of like you have to pick one. You're either saying that profit and we're going to trust companies to always do right by their consumers, or you're going to need a natural counterbalance, which I would say government regulation. Was that a lot?
That's really good pushback. And
Right.
I think Tilting Windmill was asking just a quick clarification question. And, I think we could all take turns answering this, because I'd be curious to know what everybody says. And I don't know, Johnny, are you still here? You haven't been able to speak in a while?
I think my position on whether any gods exist is that no, I believe any of them do. There are some God concepts that are definitely more logical than others, but I don't believe that any of them actually exist because there's no real evidence of them. But the Christian God, I firmly believe that the Christian God does not exist. At least, as described in the Bible, I don't believe that the Christian God can exist, because it seems to be a logical contradiction. It seems like it keeps constantly contradicting its nature, which makes sense when you consider that it's a book written by several different authors who all had different ideas of what their God was supposed to be. But I can't necessarily disprove, say, a deistic God. I can't necessarily disprove that, but I don't believe in it because there's no evidence for it.
And Bionic, what would you say to that? Do you want me to put the question back up?
Oh, yeah, you might have to throw up the question again. I might have missed it.
They're asking whether you believe in gods or not.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I missed that. Oh, yeah. So I don't think there is gods. You know what I mean? I think at the very least, or maybe I have that kind of view of, no, I just can't. There's no space in my worldview in which a God exists, and even if one did, it's inconsequential. So if there is there a god the size of an atom in a far distant galaxy? Yeah, probably. But it's inconsequential so much so that I wouldn't even entertain it as a possibility. So no, I don't. No.
Dan, where do you sit with this?
I'm an atheist in both a weak and a strong sense, or a soft and a hard sense. So in the soft sense, I'm an atheist in that I lack a belief in God. But I would go even further and say positively there is no God, at least if we understand God in the conventional sense, such as the Christian sense, the Christian's type of God who's supposed to be omnipotent. I think it could be argued that, and I have argued that that implies contradictions, and there aren't any contradictions, so therefore there cannot be that sort of God.
And I remain agnostic because, according to my understanding of the potential of what a God could be, is that I've actually had very interesting conversations with deists who would reduce God concept, and I don't mean to say reduce disrespectfully, but it's far less anthropomorphized, and they would reduce the God concept to be energy, for example, right? And we know energy can either be created nor destroyed. So if somebody goes down this type of a road, it's quite possible. There's other things that I've been looking into that don't have definitive answers regarding consciousness as being fundamental. So there's really some interesting viewpoints out there that I just don't think we'll ever be able to get answers to. For one thing, to get answers to some of these bigger questions, we would need to somehow have an objective view, and that's impossible. Everything that we look at is going to be through a subjective lens. So it becomes difficult to say, for me, positively one way or the other. As far as the anthropomorphized gods go, the reason I don't call myself like an agnostic atheist or a type of atheist is because, for one thing, agnosticism entails that it's not possible to know, and that's where I'm really hinging, that it's impossible to know side. As far as the stuff like the Abrahamic gods or the Hindu gods, the other gods that I've studied, they're so obviously mythologized that I just don't even take those claims seriously. And again, I don't mean to be disrespectful of people who this is their entire worldview is built around this, but I don't take the story about the Yahweh God any more seriously than I take the story about Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny or the leprechaun at the end of the rainbow. And so if I'm going to start calling myself an atheist, then I'd have to call myself an anti-leprechaunist, an anti-unicorn. You know what I mean? To me, they fall under that same category. So I don't even go down that road. If somebody could come up with a convincing story for one of those gods, I'd be more than willing to listen to it, but I don't even debate the existence of those gods because they're just so nonsensical to me. I just don't even take it seriously. I focus my debates on more interesting questions about consciousness, or not even debates, discussions about consciousness and things that matter. That's really more interesting. I do think that if there was, because I do believe in objective morality, and I believe that the virtues are actually very important. And so even though I don't attribute this to any type of a deity or a god or anything like that, I believe the natural law is what really supports the argument for the objective moral position, that virtues are extremely important. And having studied many of the different religions, especially the big ones, the virtue of justice, I do believe is very important because it's one of the virtues. And when I study all the different concepts of religion and I think about justice in particular, the only theological models that seem just to me have to do with things like reincarnation and karma, because you literally get what you deserve for the good or the bad, right? Your actions actually do matter. When it comes to the concepts of like heaven and hell, that's so unjust and so illogical that I just can't even take it seriously. That's my position on all that.
Santa Claus is a better track record though, because people get presents out of their tree every year. But no,
that's hilarious.
I think someone in the comments was asking what my name was. I'm Johnny, Jonny, Johnny.
It's nice to see you, brother. Dogs, if you want to join the conversation and express your views or push back on anything you hear here on the panel, everybody is welcome. Any topic is on the table for discussion. My only rule is that we try to be respectful of each other, but please feel free to join the conversation if you have anything in particular you'd like to share with the group. You're always welcome.
We like the group here. certain, and I think it's really important. And I agree with what Objective is doing, because he's trying to create something where everyone has a voice, respecting what they for what they believe, instead of it being an echo chamber of just people all agreeing with each other, which is good, because I think when people are able to give their differing opinions and beliefs, that's a good thing, because it helps us learn and grow. So.
I mean, I think one of the things I take pride on is new information might change my perspective. But I think just the way I think about it is based on what I see, based on patterns, based on my understanding of the world around me, the God as it's constructed or described or even conceptualized, it feels superfluous. It really doesn't feel necessary, and it feels unlikely. So that's the approach I take.
I agree. We have very good naturalistic explanations for the world. I don't see the need for any God, especially knowing that energy can't be created or destroyed with with what we know about it. I don't see any reason why a God is necessary. I think the universe is just eternal. I think the very foundation of the universe just has always existed, and all of this is just an expansion. And to be sure, like, the evidence we have now suggests the expansion rate is slowing down, which I think somewhat substantiates the Big Bang Big Crunch model, which is that eventually it's going to sling back in on itself. And so I think the universe is eternal. I think it's just possibly been a cycle of Big Bang Big Crunch for forever, and it'll always be like that, maybe. I mean, we can never know for sure, but that's the evidence that we have available would show. So.
Yeah, I think Dan and I both are in agreement with that. That's one of the things we both discussed, had touched on in our previous conversation, that we both also think that in the big expansion, big contraction, big bang, big crunch, however you want to say it, I think that's our view as well. And tilting windmill, just to address this really quickly. So one of the things that I did study when I was in seminary is the origins of atheism and agnosticism. And the key difference between agnosticism and soft atheism, it comes down to the whether or not you think it's possible to know. So the soft atheist position is a lack of belief, but there isn't the claim that you can't actually know, technically speaking. Now, again, these words evolve over time. Definitions, I should say, evolve over time. They change with culture, society, and stuff. We make up the words in the first place. We're free to change the definition. So I don't hold people's feet to the fire when it comes to atheism, agnosticism, and all that stuff. People can identify however they want, frankly. But technically, the reason that I stick with the original meaning for agnosticism comes down to the possibility of knowledge, right? That's where the A is without Gnosticism, comes from gnosis, which is knowledge. So in ancient Greece, this was a belief that it's impossible to know whether or not the gods or supernatural phenomena exist. And it comes down to the fact that we just lack the ability to test these things. I think if you explain that to most soft atheists, they would actually agree that the reason they don't believe is because, well, obviously lack of evidence, but lack of evidence comes down to the fact that we can't really get evidence for some things, right? Like if it's supernatural, then it's outside the realm of science. So a lot of soft atheists are probably agnostics, and they just don't know it, because a lot of people conflate belief and knowledge, and they think, oh, agnosticism is all about knowledge and atheism is all about belief. But agnosticism actually covers both belief as well. Agnostics neither believe nor disbelieve. So this really that comes down to the knowledge aspect of whether you think it's possible to know or not. And as an agnostic, I just don't think, as I mentioned before, that it's even possible to know about things that we can't test or measure. It's like going back beyond the Big Bang, right? That we just don't know. We can only measure so far back because we have evidence with the cosmic radiation background. We're tracking the expansion, so on and so forth. So there's things that we can measure about the current state of the universe, but we can't go back beyond a certain point. We can't go back beyond the Planck scale, right? So there's just some things we have to admit that we just won't ever know. And agnosticism is that in that same realm. There's just some things that we just can't measure or test, and that's my position there.
I think
I'm curious what
again,
Tilting Windmill's view is. If maybe if he's a theist or not atheist or agnostic or?
Definitely, I would say an atheist. Now, I don't know if I've actually asked him directly, but I'm pretty sure Tilting Windmill is an atheist. I don't know if he considers himself to be a hard atheist or soft atheist or agnostic atheist. I honestly couldn't answer that question.
Okay. I hadn't thought before you just said it now that soft atheism is actually compatible with agnosticism. You could be both, because if you lack a belief in God, if that's all it takes to be a soft atheist is just lacking a belief in God, well, that is something an agnostic lacks. So you could be both. The way you defined agnosticism as thinking it's impossible to have knowledge of whether there's a God, I think that's different than how I understand agnosticism. And I think we touched on this some when you called into my show a while ago, but that's a novel understanding of agnosticism to me. Like, I just thought it's the view that you don't know whether there is or isn't a God. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And you're not necessarily ruling out the possibility that one day you will come to acquire knowledge of whether there is or isn't. It's just that right now you don't have that knowledge, so you're an agnostic. So that's interesting. That
I take the position, it makes me sound like a jerk, but I don't think anybody, I don't think the even most devout believer knows there's a God. They just believe strongly, right? So to try to draw the distinction between knowing and believing, I think it's a term. It's playing with terminology. In reality, if you ask me, do I know there's a God? No. Do I believe there's a God? No. So there is no discernible difference for me. And then if I was a devout believer, do I know there's a God? Of course I know, but do I really know? No. I just believe strongly, and a strong belief isn't knowledge. So I do. That's why for me, I don't draw a distinction between atheism, like I don't believe in God and I don't know there's a God, because for me it's all belief anyway, because it's not a knowledge based conversation.
Yeah. And I think I have like I think for me, like there are certain gods that we can know do not exist because they're just pure mythology. Like we don't need we know that leprechauns don't exist and unicorns don't exist. Well, unicorns are another story because it's based on a translation thing. But like I don't believe, like I think the Christian God, for example, is just pure nonsense because the book that talks about it is filled with errors, contradictions, and straight up lies. Like the New Testament is basically just fan fiction of the Old Testament. That's all it is. Mormonism did the same thing to Christianity that Christianity did to Judaism. So I don't think that God exists. I would go as far to say that God does not exist. But I can never disprove the idea of a deistic God. I don't believe one exists because I don't think it's necessary. But I could never say for certain that it doesn't exist. But I also don't think that it would care whether I don't believe in it or not. I think that the whole concept of a God caring whether you believe it or not is ridiculous. Especially if it's a tri-omni being, why would a tri-omni being care whether a human believes in it or not?
No, I agree. And if you see here, I've got the Cambridge Dictionary pulled up. If you can see it, it specifically says a person who believes it's impossible to know. So this definition is tied to agnosticism even currently. And again, now when I went to Bible college, that was over 20 years ago. And so obviously, times change and stuff like that. But I know that currently the understanding for agnosticism is the same as it was. Agnosticism has not changed over the years. Atheism has changed significantly. Atheism was originally what we would call hard atheism. It was the active denial of the existence of gods. It was a positive position and a positive claim that gods do not exist. Whereas nowadays, you have soft atheism, which we talked about. You have different theistic models, such as like Buddhism, where there really is no God, right? It's not even a theistic model at that point because there's no God. So it's a religious model, but it's technically considered an atheistic religion because Buddhism doesn't have any gods. So atheism is this really umbrella term that can cover a lot of different viewpoints, which is why when I talk to atheists, I try to figure out what kind of an atheist they are, what their actual viewpoint is. And I don't hold people to these definitions, but there is actually like a history of the etymology of these definitions of these words themselves and how they've kind of changed over time. So this is not something I just I just made up, and it's not something my professors just made up when they were teaching it at Bible college. This actually is rooted in history, but just wanted to show that real quick.
But also, it's taken on a political connotation as well, because now I know atheists that, for the most part, they kind of don't care, but when they had to be, not had to, they've taken an atheist position to contrast themselves with that kind of feeling of Christian nationalism, or to kind of contrast themselves with those people who have turned religiosity into a political faction or something like that. So that's also that component that has kind of taken a rise, and I think that's also kind of where the four horsemen of the the four horsemen of atheism, they kind of recruited a lot of people because of that backlash against that the beginning of the rise of like dominionism and all that stuff. Just putting that out there.
Thanks for putting that definition on the screen, objective ethics. That's interesting to see. I hadn't really researched this much before, but I looked at some other dictionaries like the Merriam-Webster, and I see the sort of definition you give as well as the sort of definition I give. Well, so the first one on Merriam-Webster for agnostic is a person who holds the view that any ultimate reality, such as a supreme being, is unknown and probably unknowable. So it doesn't say certainly unknowable, just probably unknowable. So I guess that is consistent with the idea that, well, maybe there's at least a chance one will acquire knowledge one way or the other. But I have also seen and you showed examples of the sort of definition you give. So there's just different senses of the term out there, and I don't know what's the most common or prevalent one. But I think it's really important just to ask someone, what do they mean by a certain term, like capitalism and egoism, as came up before, to really make headway in a discussion. It's not enough to just apply these labels, because it's often the case that there are multiple senses attached to them, and you just have to have a discussion to find out what someone really means by a term. And by the way, I probably need to go pretty soon, so I'll just say now, in case I don't speak again, thank you for inviting me up here, and I enjoyed being able to participate and listening to all of you discuss things. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on. I'm so glad that you got a chance to catch the stream, kind of see how we do things here. It's pretty open, as you can see. I welcome any ideas. As always, I try to encourage people to be polite. I find you to be extremely polite and professional, and I'm looking forward to having you as the featured guest. And I think we are doing that on the 25th. The gal who does the thumbnails for me, she actually, I think she's either completed that one or she's working on it, but I did get that picture from you, so I'll make sure to get that set up. Usually on Wednesdays, I put out a notice ahead of time letting people know the show is upcoming. So if I can figure out how to link your channel to that actual show, because the next week's guest was asking if I could do that, and I haven't even tried to do that before, so I'm not making any promises because my time to figure this shit out is very limited. But if I can, I'm going to try to link your channel to the actual show in the show itself, not just in the description, if you even know what I'm talking about, because it may tag your audience directly at that point. But either way, we're going to have a great show. I want to talk to you about Ayn Rand and Ayn Rand's ethics. And I think we should get into, depending on what kind of time you have, get into some of the stuff about politics, because I am really curious as to how this whole capitalism thing is supposed to actually work, with everybody just donating to public services. I'm highly skeptical, but I haven't really heard it all fleshed out. So I'm looking forward to that discussion, and I'm glad that you jumped on the show today.
Okay, yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well, and happy to talk about any of that. As for the tagging, I don't. That might be a feature YouTube no longer has. I know that it used to be the case that if you put an @ sign before someone's name, like @Dan Norton 1 in the title, that would turn up as a link that people could click on. But I think that they did away with that feature for a while, at least. I don't know if they've brought it back. So I don't know if it's possible.
It works, but you need.
Oh, it does work now?
Yeah, instead of just their channel name, you need their username now. So, like when someone is typing in the chat, it'll give you their username at whatever their username is instead of what their channel name is called. So you need the username.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, if you can do that, great. If not a big deal. But yeah, I definitely appreciate any kind of linking. So yeah, thanks again for having me on, and I'll look forward to our chat in a few weeks.
Thanks, Dan. It was a pleasure having you up here. You have a good one, right?
Okay, you too. Catch you all later.
Bye. Very nice. I liked his. I liked the way he argued. It was very nice. I liked his perspective. It was very nice.
I feel bad that I just dropped the challenge on his lap, and then I feel bad. You know what I mean?
No, it's fine. That's what we're here to do, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate your input, both of you gentlemen, actually, and I've been really impressed. Johnny, you're so young compared to myself, and a little younger than Chris. Chris looks like he's still fairly young, and so, but
I'm immature
older than you for sure. And so, no, I really appreciate Johnny. You for being as young as you are. You're a critical thinker, and you're open-minded. You're willing to consider the opposite side of things and to look at your own actions and behaviors and to judge yourself and say, hey, maybe I need to change this or change that. And it's such a nice thing to see in people. And Bionic, I've been very impressed with you as well. You have a little bit more years under your belt. And so that comes across in the things that you share. You're also very empathetic. So in addition to being intelligent, I see you as being an empathetic person. And so I'm so glad that you guys have jumped on here. There was another gentleman who was in the chat that said he would be interested in joining a conversation in about 10 to 15 minutes, if we're still on. And I don't know if you guys have the energy to keep going or not, but I'm certainly open to it. My schedule's open today, as long as you guys want to talk. And I think he should be coming on here fairly soon if you guys are up for continuing.
Yeah.
I'm just going to wet my whistle. I'll be right back. And
right.
Let me just give me 1 second.
Thank you, Objective. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I try my best to be open-minded. I try to listen to people's positions and see if there's anything that I need to change. You know, my whole goal is to find out what's true and believe in what's true. And so anytime somebody gives me some opposition, I'm always willing to look into it. So
it's so easy for us because of the ego. And you know, this is something that eventually I will do some shows on, because it's going to take more than one show to do. But I will be putting out a video about the ego, because our ego is an extremely important tool that we have. It's how we basically gauge the way that we fit into society, the way that we fit into communities, and the ego. But it's also what prompts us to be very self-centered. So having a balance in the ego is extremely important. And the things that I try to encourage people, I've got the hiccups, excuse me. The things that I try to encourage people to do is, one, strive for wisdom, because I do believe that attaining the virtues is the best thing that we can do in this life. If you attain the virtues, then you're going to be a good, well-rounded human being. You're going to find a lot of success. The fundamental virtue is wisdom. And the reason they say the fundamental virtue is wisdom, because if you don't have wisdom, it's very difficult to understand things like justice and fairness and mercy and things of this nature. So to understand any of the other virtues, you need to have wisdom. So I do encourage people to attain wisdom. The other thing that I really encourage people to do is to become self-aware, to be able to look at your own ego and find out if your ego is in good balance or not, because you don't want to, altruism does not make sense. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not in a position to help anybody, frankly.
Yeah.
And so the whole altruistic model just doesn't make sense. You need to have a healthy sense of ego. But it's so easy. I know for myself in particular, man, it's so easy for me to get high on my own horse and really committed to my own ideas and my own ideologies and start to become dogmatic about things, because the ego really sets us up for that. So if you could maintain a healthy self image and have confidence in yourself, but still not be so tied to your own ego that you're unable to consider what other people are offering. And this is a challenge. It's not easy. And it's something that, like a lot of things with life, this is a journey, not a destination, because you could have a great balance with your ego and self-perception and everything at 1 minute, and then pretty soon you start to lose sight of what's important, and you start getting, leaning too far one way or the other. So it's a constant, it's like exercise, right? You don't get in good shape, you stay in good shape, right?
By the way, I think your dog is just trying to get in. I think he needs the link.
I just posted it in the chat for him.
Oh, all right, cool.
I thought I pinned the link. Is it not up there anymore?
I don't know if it's but I had to scroll up to get it.
Yeah. Well, I was looking for it. I wasn't able to find it. I figured maybe Objective could find it faster.
What the hell? I
posted it in the YouTube. I posted it, so it should work. But it's not going to post as a link because only the person who is running the stream can post links. Oh, and moderators can also post links, but I'm not a mod yet.
Oh, that's something I'm supposed to do too, Johnny. I'm supposed to actually make you a mod. Let me put this link back in here. I swear I thought that this
once I have mod powers, I can take over the world.
Good morning,
welcome to the conversation. Now, do I call you your dogs or what's your preference?
My name is Steve. You can call me Steve. That's fine.
Hey, Steve, how you doing?
Good, mate. How you doing?
Doing all right.
Objective, I was the guy talking to you in the comment section yesterday about the objective ethics, your syllogisms, etc.
Oh, very good, sir. So nice to meet you. I really appreciated that you articulated your points very well. I could see you're probably highly educated, and I really appreciate getting pushback from people who have a fundamental understanding of their own view. So I'm glad you joined today. Now, I just want to preface, I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in our conversation. I was really distracted because I was doing about too many things at once, but I have a debate coming up against Mark Reed, who's going to be a very difficult opponent. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned that yet, but we finally did get a hard date set for that. That's supposed to happen on the 24th, just to keep that in mind. Yeah. So anyway, so I'm not going to give up my best argument for objective morality until after that debate, because I'm already going to be in over my head with Mark Reed. And if I just give out my argument ahead of time, he's going to watch this video and then be able to counter everything. You know what I mean? He'll be well prepared for it. So I am going to keep a couple things close to my chest, as it were, but I'm happy to have the discussion because I could kind of dance around a little bit.
Yeah, no worries. I just continuing on with the discussion you guys were just having. My position is that God is an incoherent idea, that it doesn't make sense to me. So to me, the conversation's a non-starter, which is even, I guess, if you had a spectrum, it's even further out than atheism. Mm-hmm. So that's my position on that. Listening to you guys reminds me back in the 2010s, all the theist debates. It's quite funny.
And I get that position too, because a lot of these God concepts just don't really make sense at all. Like, the idea that the Bible God is real, it's literally a logically contradictory being. The Bible makes contradictory claims about it. One passage claims that it's all-powerful, it can do all things. But then in another one, the army it was protecting fails, and they die because of the other army using iron chariots. So can an all-powerful being be stopped by iron? I guess not, right? So that's kind of an issue. Or when it says he can't change his mind, but then he changes his mind throughout the rest of the book. Like it's contradictions. So it can't work. So
I think God was created in the image of man, and
I agree.
I
agree. I think
that's where it is, and so all the, people can't define it sufficiently enough to make it a coherent concept to me. So
I think it's ridiculous we're still having the conversation. To be honest, you would think logic and reason and human development would have gotten us long past this conversation, but again,
maybe one day.
Maybe one day. Again, it's funny just to kind of bring it back to, like, I feel like the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic God long ago should have been lumped in with Zeus and Poseidon, and you know what I mean. It should have been added to the folklore a long time ago, but because the path of our history and whatnot, we're still taking it seriously as if it's a real intellectual conversation. You know what I mean?
And even God in the Bible, like in some of the earlier chapters, is more like Zeus in a way. He's more anthropomorphic. You don't get this. Oh, it's a completely spiritual, transcendental being, triomnes until later. That's when they start saying, this being, he's triomnes and he transcends everything and he's not like a human. But that's not what it was originally. Originally, he was meant to be more human-like. And that was the same for a lot of the gods of that time period. They were meant to be more human. And the Bible there's not just one God either. There's a few. There's literally a divine council of gods. Ashera, for example, is a fertility goddess. And she's featured in the Bible, which bonus points, the KJV incorrectly translates her name as a grove because they didn't know who she was yet.
Gotcha.
There's a few different things you gentlemen mentioned I'd like to touch on. First of all, I'm exactly on the same page with what Steve had mentioned, and I think I kind of touched on this briefly before. Is that I literally don't take a lot of this stuff seriously enough to even attach a label to it, which is why I don't attach the atheism to my own definition, as far as self-identification or however you say that, because it's just so incoherent. The incoherence to me is you have the scientific or the practical incoherence, like time. If God creates everything, does that mean God created time? Well, you need time to create. I mean, the whole thing just becomes, just incoherent. The Trinity is another incoherent thing. But what I really find to be incompatible is the morality. It's something I talk a lot about on my channel, because being a moral realist. And again, if somebody believes in objective or subjective morality, I don't really think it matters at the end of the day. I think all that matters is how we treat each other and how we behave, how we treat the planet. The epistemology is really irrelevant, frankly. It's a fascinating discussion and debate to have in philosophy, and I do enjoy it. But at the end of the day, it's how do we treat people? And we look at the contradiction between what we as human beings agree on as being good, whether subjective or objective. We agree on certain things universally, like murder, sexual assault, theft. I mean, there's just some core things that most everybody on the planet understands is not good. And then the God of this, and the gods, not just in the Abrahamic, because there's different gods in Hindu, theology as well, that are attributed to certain actions that we consider to be immoral. When this God is drowning babies because they're sinful, or commanding Saul to kill all the women and children, we say this is horrible. This is absolutely terrible. And then the believer is committed to having to somehow justify this as being good. It just becomes so incoherent to me. So I like how Steve mentioned incoherence, because that's why I don't take it seriously, is because it's like trying to have a debate about a square circle or something. It just literally makes no sense to me. And the other thing that Johnny mentioned, which is true, if you actually study the history, something I might do a talk on my channel. Now, when I was at Bible college, this is not something that I actually studied, but I was exposed to it. Before the Israelites, or the Jews were Israelites, they were Hebrews, and before that, they actually were Canaanites. It's all a Semitic people group, and they came out of the land of Canaan. Well, if you actually go back to archaeology, you'll find that Yahweh was one of the Canaanite gods. He was a storm deity. Asherah was in that pantheon of gods. El was the head god, and so you see this in the Bible as it transitions from what we would consider to be henotheism, where you have kind of one God is at the top and then the other gods are underneath. And like Johnny mentioned, the divine council, for example, and you actually see remnants of this as a transition from henotheism into monotheism. My personal belief, and I think there's a lot of scholarship that's behind me on this, is that this is an influence from Zoroastrianism. Most historians that look at this stuff believe that Zoroastrianism is the oldest monotheistic religion. I know a lot of people say it's a dualistic religion because you've got Anger Manu versus Spenta Manu, and there is a dualism aspect to it. But technically, in Zoroastrianism, there's only one God, one uncreated being, and that's Ahura Mazda. And so the Persians, as we talked about in today's video, with the Israelites being returned, right, to Jerusalem, they were heavily under the Persian influence. And you see a lot of this stuff in the archaeological record. And so that's when you get this transition to more of a monotheistic concept. And so Asherah, El, all these other gods get kind of amalgamated into the Yahweh God. And pretty soon it goes from being this God of the people, God of the Israelites, to this God of everything that rules the whole world and stuff. And it's a very interesting kind of evolution that happens over time.
Yeah, and you said there are remnants, and yeah, you're right. Genesis 1:26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make humans in our image, according to our likeness.'" So he's not just talking about himself. It's not God making humans in His image. It's let us make them in our image.
I also think especially modern evangelical Christianism, they're using that term monotheism very loosely, because I would argue they'd elevated Satan or the devil almost to equal a binary counter god. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. He plays like the antithesis role to God. Yeah, absolutely.
Justice for Snake. The snake told the truth. God lied.
Right.
Well, the
So,
snake's
yes,
not even Satan, so I mean, that's
right.
just a later Christian interpretation. The snake's literally a snake. It's literally called a wild animal. God
Mhm.
curses it to do what snakes do. It's literally a snake. That's all it is.
Yeah. I mean, back in my youthful days, I remember reading an article of all the ways Christianity borrowed, co-opted, or just outright stole narrative devices, stories, constructs, and all that stuff from other religions. You know what I mean? And so it was just, and it's not hard to see why Jesus's birthday is in December and all that stuff. You know what I mean? It's
The pacifism that people try to attach to Jesus, which is really hilarious because if you study the New Testament and set aside all the apologetics for it, Jesus was a practicing Jew for one thing, and he actually supported the Mosaic Law and all this other kind of stuff. So he was not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, there's a particular passage that's very unsettling when you point it out to Christians. But Jesus was condemning the Pharisees for their hypocrisy. In that they didn't want to follow all the laws. They only wanted to select which laws they wanted to follow. And the law that Jesus cited that he was criticizing them for not following was actually the law that says they should be stoning their disobedient children to death. So this is not a pacifist type of a concept, but there is some little tidbits that you get, and it would be from the influence of Eastern theologies, Buddhism in particular. And we have to remember that the Silk Road trade routes, by the time that Jesus is around, the Silk Road had been basically fully developed at that time, right? So you're getting not only commerce coming from the East, but you're getting ideas, philosophy and religion and things like that are now coming into the Greco-Roman territories. And so Jesus would have been well informed of that. You also had Greek Stoicism and the Greek philosophers. So all of this really comes into kind of form what this Jesus character is talking about. So he didn't invent any of this. None of this is unique to the New Testament.
And if we set aside Paul, and you're right. So if we set aside Paul and the apologetics that often rely on on somehow fulfill means to abolish, when he said, "I didn't come to abolish." Jesus was a Jew. He was an advocate for the Mosaic Law. And he scolded the Pharisees for not following the law. They wanted to follow the tradition of the elders instead. He didn't like that because he wanted them to follow the law and not the tradition of the elders. So he scolded them for that. And he told his followers to respect the Pharisees and to follow what they say because they sit on Moses' seat, a reference to the Mosaic laws. And so Jesus, time and time again upheld the law. And all he did was, when he says, "I have come to fulfill the law," he's talking about bringing the Torah to its fullness. To make full the Torah, wants to bring it to its fullest understanding, which included him trying to tweak some of the laws, like trying to make the law for divorce harder, or one of the only teachings of his that was actually pretty good was saying, instead of always eye for an eye, sometimes you need to turn the other cheek. That was like one of the only main good things that he actually taught. Everything else seemingly had to do with just the Mosaic law in general. And so but I mean he upheld the law time and time again. He upheld it, and he just came to bring it to its fullness. Is all he came to do.
And I'll put on my tinfoil conspiracy theorist hat. I also feel like the meek and mild Jesus, that narrative was oftentimes used to kind of keep the power structure in place. So oppressed people or people who are being abused, they were told, "Don't worry about here on earth. The meek shall inherit the earth. So be a godly servant, be a godly, know your place because your true reward is in heaven." So I think there was even some level of the pacifist Jesus was, I think, pushed to prevent people from, their torches and their pitchforks a little bit. You know what I mean?
Good point, actually. Yeah. And isn't it funny?
Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Right.
Yeah, right. And isn't it funny that seemingly most religions, I won't say every, but most religions, the promises they make are after you're dead.
Right.
Because they can't really promise you anything while they're on Earth. They're like, well, after you die, you'll get all these things. So they're just trying to keep you in it. But I mean, I agree. Well, so personally, I'm under the belief that Jesus didn't actually say most of the things that are in the book. I think some of them he might have actually said, but for example, when he tells the Pharisees that Psalm 110 is actually about him, and he misquotes it. He says, "And the Lord said to my Lord, come sit at my feet, and I will make your enemies a footstool." He's like, so if the Messiah is the son of David, why does David call him Lord? Well, the Pharisees would know that that's not actually what it says. The Pharisees would know that it actually says, Yahweh saith unto my Lord. This is an oracle to King David saying, this is what my God is saying to you. So this is prophecy to King David. Well, the Pharisees would know this, and they would have pointed that out. So if any version of this story actually happened in real life where Jesus actually brought this to them, they wouldn't have been speechless like the story claims. They would have said, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not right. You're saying something ain't true." And same goes for John 3:13 when he claims that no one has ascended into heaven except him. He calls himself the Son of Man, and so says nobody has ascended into heaven except himself. I have to believe that if he had actually told people this, they would have been like, bullshit. 2 Kings 2:11, Elijah ascended into heaven in a whirlwind and a fiery chariot, no less. I have to, it seems to me that most of the things that the New Testament authors say Jesus said just isn't something he would have actually said. They're just post his death things people were claiming he said. Maybe oral tradition, or maybe it's just
he may never have existed.
I'm under the impression that he existed as a person. We seemingly have some evidence that he was actually a real person, but I'm inclined to believe that he's no different than the mythology made up about the Caesars or the mythology that made up about Nero. I don't think that he's anything special. I don't believe the mythology. I think he was a real person that was mythologized. And it seemed to be a pretty common thing back then that they would take figures of authority and say, hey, here's all this crazy shit this person did, even though they didn't actually do it. And so I think that most of what the Bible says he said, he didn't actually say. I think that it's just I think it's either oral traditions people have just been passing down about him after he died. People talk about that kind of stuff, and then it just gets pushed around that, oh yeah, he said this, even though he didn't actually say it. Or it's just the New Testament authors just putting words in his mouth, which makes sense because when you look at when you look at the version of him telling the Pharisees this, it looks like a mistake somebody could make by reading the Greek Septuagint, where it replaces Yahweh with Lord. I believe the word is Hycurios is used there, which is just a placeholder for Yahweh because it's to protect the divine name. It looks very much like somebody who's reading the Greek Septuagint would make. It looks like a mistake they would make rather than something Jesus would actually make. So I'm very certain, or at least I have a feeling that story is just made up, and the author has just made that one up. And because they're reading from the Septuagint, Matthew is reading from the author Matthew is reading from the Greek Septuagint. That he made that mistake because he didn't realize that Hycurios was actually just a placeholder for Yahweh.
You also have to remember most of the history of Christianity was the oral traditions and being gatekept by the learned class, and the idea of the layperson being able to go and reading texts is maybe the last 100 years. You know what I mean? Like there wasn't a lot of so a majority of the narrative of Christ and his teachings and this, that, and the other is kind of a modern invention, because before that it was all oral tradition, or it was only whatever the gatekeepers were letting the dirty masses learn. You know what I mean? So it's a new invention to even have these kind of academic conversations.
Yeah.
Now, before I don't want to just completely derail the momentum here, but I do want to give a Bionic or Steve. There's a couple things that you guys, you gentlemen, had mentioned in some of the comments that we had discussions on offline, or not when we were doing live. Bionic, you mentioned something about one of the videos that I had put out recently, and I can't remember which one it was. If it was the video about identity and transgender, or if it was about the Changing Minds video. But if you guys had any pushback or anything, any criticisms or any comments that you wanted to make me directly, I want to make sure that I put my money where my mouth is and show people that it's perfectly fine to have your ideas questioned or challenged, and I do welcome that. I appreciate that people do it respectfully, but we are here to, if anybody has any criticisms or any comments, get good or bad, please, this is my door's always open to you guys, and I'm always willing to listen to what anybody has to say.
I mean, I'll let kind of whomever go first, but my main thing, it wasn't even a challenge. It was so much of It's just me making the point that I think um, the point I kind of want to make is like, I know, again, I kind of touched upon it when we were talking about Gothics and everything like that. But I do think that there comes a point where things that really shouldn't be political have become political, like things like social or social issues like equity, equality, protection, respecting the people's agencies and identity, all those things. Somehow, some way, those have been turned into politically left-leaning positions, right? And the point I was going to kind of make is like I in a lot of the when you were the video you were making about the pronouns and stuff, it seems like you were couching a lot of what you were saying to say, hey, I'm coming from the center, hey, I'm coming from a place of common sense, this, then the other, as if that was contrasting that left versus right. And the only point I was going to make is I think most people who take that kind of humanistic, pro-social, empathetic position, we've been cast as lefties, we've been cast as progressive, but I think that's only because the Overton window has been pushed so far to the right that showing any sense of empathy and common sense, kind of human decency has been weaponized into being woke or being radical and extreme. So I think the only point I was going to make, and again, maybe there's a more organic way to say it, is I think that a lot of the language we're using, I'm not going to make the accusation, but it just seems you're being very careful not to seem like you were going too far in one direction or the other, where I felt like everything you were saying was perfectly aligned with what has unfortunately been cast as the radical left these days, because you were showing openness and empathy. Right? I hope that makes sense.
I think that's whether you call it a criticism or not, no, I think you're absolutely right. Real quick, Johnny, if you could post a comment in the YouTube chat. I finally figured out how to make somebody a moderator. Tilting Windmill, I just made you a moderator, even though I hope that's okay. You are the best mod, as I mentioned before when I introduced you to the audience. So I gave you mod powers, and Johnny, if you'll post a comment, I can make you a mod for the channel if you're interested in doing that. Now, just real quick on that, I don't actually have rules as far as no preaching, no politics, whatever. The only rule that I have is going to be based on respect. So as far as regulating people's comments and stuff, I really want it to be open for people to express their views freely. However, there are some things like bigotry. And I mean obvious bigotry. If somebody just says, I don't think women or trans women should play in sports, I don't consider that to be that's a nuanced view that needs discussion. But if somebody says that, a man can't be a woman or something like that, I find that to be more bigoted. So try to use your best judgment. I really do want this to be as open for people as far as sharing views without just getting blocked or kicked out. But I can't keep an eye on the chat while I'm having discussions because I'm too old to diversify my attention, to be honest with you. So if you guys could help kind of keep an eye on things, would appreciate that. And no, you're right, brother. That is a fair criticism, because when you're trying to find a compromise, and this is one of the issues that my channel is going to have, and one of the reasons I mentioned earlier that really I'm just setting myself up to piss off everybody, because and one reason I'm not affiliated politically is because I actually have just as much problem with the left as I do the right, depending on what issue we're talking about. And I just find that the lack of middle ground is really something that upsets me personally. I don't think we're going to make any progress if we don't find some compromises. And unfortunately, one of the most important or most effective ways to get people to compromise is to make the first move. It's so easy to say, well, I'll compromise if they compromise. Well, then you're just basically sitting on your own fence at that point. Nobody's making any moves. So if everyone's got to get out on the dance floor, somebody's got to make that first move. So I do try to be very open and very soft with my language with people. Sometimes I lose my temper with people. There's a guy, I think a lot of people know at this point, but there's a guy who has a website called Construction Zone named Mike. He and I were having debates, and everything was going fine. We were having a disagreement, but it was very respectful. But the issue of slavery got brought up, and this fucking asshole started, in his defense of slavery, started talking about like how he owns his children as property. There's nothing wrong with slavery axiomatically. And he was making these comments that were actually getting me emotionally upset. And I went off, and I still will. If I ever saw that guy in person, I would tell him to his face, he's a piece of shit. That's fucked up. You don't own your children. People are not property. You care about your children. you're their guardian and I want you to do well for your children. But to say I own my children as property, that fuck, man, that still pisses me off thinking about it. So I'm not a perfect person. I don't always do what I think we should do, because I think I'm certainly not changing Mike's mind by calling him a piece of shit, which I did on Discord. I literally told him what a fucking piece of shit I think he is. So that's not an effective way to deal with that situation. And I know better. So I think I might have mentioned before, I used to work as a bouncer at the strip clubs, and I am a very non-violent person. I'm not a tough guy. I'm not like, looking for reasons to get into fights with people and stuff like that. So I was very effective working doors because I was able to disarm people using what we call verbal judo. Right. And so I do think that that's the most effective way to change minds is to verbally disarm people. So that's the technique that I try to use, but it does, I understand when somebody who sees the danger of the ideas, like somebody like a Gothics or Christian nationalists, when they're really promoting ideas that lead to bigotry, actual bigotry, and that can harm people, that do lead to harm people because it justifies the behavior of really ignorant, violent people. And if you don't get in their face and physically or really use strong verbal language to say, you're fucked up, you can't do this, you're an asshole or whatever, that it almost seems like you're placating what you know to be bad behavior. So I do understand where you're coming from there.
Also, I posted my, I typed in the chat if you wanted to mob me. I just wanted to, let you know.
Steve, you've been quiet for a while. Did you have any comments or anything you wanted to add?
I don't want to bust up the momentum. I mean, I'm here to talk about the objective ethics stuff with you, and I don't want to derail stuff if you guys are not interested, basically. I mean, our conversation I thought was quite interesting, and I'm interested in just digging into it a bit more with you, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Skeptic Philosophy just jumped in. It's funny. He actually was very gracious and had me on his show. And Skeptic Philosophy knows a lot about philosophy, and it's probably no surprise by his name. And so he had me on his show to discuss. Okay, Johnny, I think I just made you a moderator here, so forgive me. I'm just kind of trying to do too many things at once here. But he had me on a show to talk about ethics, and he understands I have a debate coming up. So we kind of had to, he was very generous and very gracious that he didn't try to force too much out of me at the time. And just because, like I said, I don't want to give up my best argument. Mark is going to be a really tough opponent for anybody who doesn't know. In fact, before I get into that, Skeptic, do you want to join the panel? I think I have the link up there. I'd love to hear from you if you want to jump into the conversation here. I think we're getting ready to get into some ethics and philosophy. Love to get your feedback. But he didn't put my feet to the fire because he does recognize that I have this debate coming up. I did a debate against an atheist finally about this objective versus subjective morality. And my previous debates have always been about biblical morality, which even though I had no experience in debate, I was able to win all my debates against biblical morality because it's such an undefensible position. It really, as we talked about earlier in this stream. But when it comes to the objective versus subjective argument, that is a really, really deep argument. There's really good arguments to be made for both sides. I've actually looked into both sides because I'm trying to figure out which side is right. It isn't about me being right. It's just about, trying to align myself with the truth. And with everything I've studied in philosophy, I can make a stronger argument for the objective side. To me, it just makes more sense. When it comes to the subjective side, it's easy to say that morality is subjective, but when you actually have to formulate the argument for it, it just seems like you're not able to use as many tools to build the argument for it. In fact, that's one of the criticisms that subjective morality gets, is because it's one thing to try to pick apart objective morality, but when you have to substantiate your own claim, subjective morality becomes very difficult to defend. Which is why the slight majority, about 65%, according to studies I've looked into, of modern philosophers are actually moral realists. So technically, I'm actually in line with the majority with the moral realist position, even though the majority of.
I treat this discussion like I treat the discussion of theism and atheism. Whether or not I can demonstrate something other than objective morality is real has no bearing on the truth of your claims. And so that's like, I think you're like, even if objective reality, if that could be laid to rest as not, we can't be certain about it, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone else's point of view is right. Does that make sense? Like, I think you're in a position where you need to defend your idea. And
I do agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. It's the argument coming from the impossible of the opposite is actually an apologetics tool that they came up with. Like, if it's impossible, instead of having to defend their own position about creationism, for example, or about whatever it is their deistic view is, or theistic view, they make the argument from the opposite is impossible. This is where tag gets a lot of traction, actually. Well, the atheist can't justify their own basis of knowledge, and so therefore it must come from God. It's just so ridiculous.
That doesn't matter. But tag and kalam, they're presuppositional arguments. So
Yep.
Objective.
So if I could ask a direct question to objective ethics, you talk about mind independent. That's your understanding of objective. Is that correct?
I technically would call it stance independence, but I think mind independence is more commonly understood. But it's the same thing: stance independent or mind independent.
So my question, I guess, to kick it off would be: if humans didn't exist, would objective morality exist?
Yeah, that's a good question I get a lot. And my answer to that is basically no, because the reason is I mean, the principles would still exist, yes, but it would be an irrelevant conversation in the same way. Oh, go ahead. I would say it's irrelevant because morality is specifically, in my understanding of the definition, what humans ought to do or ought not to do. So to have a conversation about morality where there's no humans, it seems kind of incoherent to me.
Right. But again, and this is kind of the thing that intrigues me about your position. It's not based on a deity or a creator. Because you reject those ideas, you think that there are some objective principles out in the ether, I guess, out in the universe somewhere. That's the part that I can't wrap my head around.
I would think the same way that if there was no, like when there were no planets, how would I say that? So if there's no planet, right, there's just a sun, then the conversation about planets wouldn't be relevant because there's no planets to talk about. But the laws of physics still apply, still exist, right?
I think the laws of physics are different from morality.
I'll say this, objective, by the way. If you're worried about your argument, like not putting forth your best argument, then I would say, you know what? Battle test it. I would say play your best argument. And if we can give you a hard time, imagine what Mark can do. So I would say if you have a strong argument, even if you've studied your argument, if it's a strong enough argument, he's not going to be able to contend it anyway. So playing it close to the vest, I just think it leaves you open, because what if you hit him with your hardest card? He's like, oh yeah, I can shoot that down. If we can't shoot that down, you know what I mean?
Hey, can I interject for a minute? How's it going, first of all?
Hey, how's it going?
Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, let me just quickly. This is Skeptic Philosophy. For anybody watching my channel that doesn't know, please check out his channel. He just started a YouTube channel recently. He talks about ethics, morality, talks about philosophy, also talks about theology. So please do look into Skeptic Philosophy's channel. I should probably try to add a link to your channel in the description after we post this video, Robert. I'll go ahead and do that for you. I'll put a link to your channel in there as well. So go ahead.
Appreciate it, man. A gentleman named Lance Bush, which is he messes with analytical philosophy and he messes with the subject of ethics. And the reason that that's important is he does a lot of writing on philosophers and kind of how they come about conclusions and whether those conclusions are arrived at through certain like standard epistemological. I'm trying to think what the SAE stands for. Or whether they're using a semantic model to come to a conclusion or what they're using. Anyway, his name is Lance Bush. He runs a YouTube channel called Lance Independent, and he talks about this subject regularly. And if you want to sharpen up your understanding of the kind of the dichotomy between these two arguments, I would suggest he is the person to go to. It's Lance Independent. And I think that he ultimately leans in the side of that it's subjective, but he writes on the subject that many people that come into philosophy that don't deal with this subject specifically, that it's kind of in the SAE model, it's a default position to say that it is objective. And this might be why you get objective positions is the dominant inside of the philosophical review. There's a paper written on this too, and I was trying to find it a moment ago. I thought I had it on my desktop, but I can't find it. But I'll be looking for it while we talk.
So where are these objective moralities? Like if they're objectively, if they're stance independent, where do they come from? Like you make a couple of claims now, which we talked about in the comment section under your video. Logic is the grounding of all morality. That gives me the impression you think logic causes morality. That kind of thing. I don't understand what you're trying to say.
I see it as being like causal. So action A leads to consequence B, just as an objective truth. So if we murder somebody or kill somebody, that person is dead. That action led to a specific consequence. I think that morality works in this way, is that if we steal from people, then we build distrust in society, and society cannot function in this way. It's impossible to have a functioning society that allows people to go stealing from each other. We see that there are certain basic laws that were developed as early as we can track history. The earliest written record, we see full development of particular laws against things like theft, murder, stuff like that. So I think that fundamentally, we knew as we were building societies, there were certain behaviors that had to be a certain way in order for society to function.
But none of that demonstrates objective morality. That just demonstrates that over time we learned that the rules worked. They optimized society. They were optimal for our societies.
I agree with you that over time we did learn that these rules work, but the objective side, in my opinion, comes because the fact that these rules work, even that terminology. So just because it took us time to understand this, I think the rules the quote unquote rules being in place is what actually makes it an objective principle. I do believe that it is a rule and it does work consistently. We can measure it, we can test it, we can observe it.
I'm sorry, that doesn't persuade me at all. In my way of thinking, what you've explained there can be adequately explained by the evolution of society. As societies become more complicated and more complex, then our morality, or what we use as, what we describe as morality, our rules for right and wrong, they evolve with us. That what you've just said there doesn't demonstrate stance independent morality. I mean, I could give the example of abortion. There are some people who say that when that a person comes into existence at the point of conception and therefore it's technically murder, whereas other people will say no, there is there's a middle ground of people who say, well, look, up to a certain point, the fetus doesn't feel, it doesn't have sensory perception, blah blah blah. So up to a certain point, it's reasonable to abort. And then there are even others who say, listen, right up to the moment of birth. And all these people believe that they are taking the correct moral position, all things considered, but they're all in conflict with each other. So how do you reconcile that with a stance independent idea of morality?
And also, just to kind of like double up to that, even when we use words like murder, we know that many cultures will rationalize that by changing the definition of murder, and then they'll call it justice or conquest or self-defense or whatever. So the fact that there are certain things that are common also belies the fact that there's also ways that cultures will modify our view of certain actions to rationalize it or justify it or otherize it in some other way. But, I feel like, I'm kind of making the same point as he is.
Yeah, I do agree that our understanding of these concepts does change over time. We could say evolve, but I think sometimes we take steps backwards, frankly. But there is definitely change over time, and I do think that majority opinion does dictate how these things are understood, but I don't necessarily think that it dictates how things are. So I tend to build the argument around. I'm trying to be as loose, and I do appreciate what you're saying, Bionic, about testing the theory out now. And I have to just mention, my wife is making something to eat real quick in the background. So if there's a lot of background noise, let me know. I don't hear. But the principle of fairness comes into play, right? So if we treat people like we want to be treated, this tends to be the most effective way of regulating just behaviors across the board. So with the murder concept, is the definition, yeah, we could say, well, if I go to war with another nation, I'm not murdering them, I'm killing them in war or whatever, right, type of a thing. But if we really look at it from a more, I'd just say, objective view, take ourselves, out of the situation personally, say, would I want this nation to come kill me? At what point am I doing something to other people that I wouldn't want done to myself? And so for the consistency to be across the board, I think there is this consistent behavior that we can look at, that we can start to define what murder actually is. The abortion thing is, I agree with you that, it gets really sticky because people use the word murder with the fetus and stuff like that. I'm a pro-choice person myself, and I'm guessing most of us on this panel are pro-choice.
Yep.
But it becomes an emotional argument, when we start to call it murder. And I think that's where it provides a certain utility for the pro-lifers, is if they start calling it murder, you're murdering babies, quote unquote, then it adds some weight to their argument. But I don't think that I don't see a fetus as a human being personally, because they're not able to reason, and they're not a moral agent. So one of the models that gets used is about reasoning beings. This is one of the objective moral models that gets used by a well-known philosopher. And so she talks about reasoning beings, that there's a contract among reasoning beings that you shouldn't infringe on other reasoning beings, rights and privileges, because they need that to be able to actually reason their way through life. So it's this consistency of, how do we treat other people? Do we want to be treated in that same way? I'm not doing a very good job of really addressing that, because I am trying to just pick my words very carefully.
What it sounds to me like you're saying, you're expressing your values, like values that you think are important. For example, the categorical imperative from Kant, etc., that kind of stuff. And you've explained that you're pro-life and that murder is used to elicit an emotional response, all of which, I understand. But that's not really the point I'm driving at. With the abortion example, you could take three different positions on that. One that from conception, abortion is wrong, absolutely categorically wrong. A kind of middle ground up to a certain point, it's okay. Then the other extreme, right up to before birth, is acceptable. And all three of those positions are justified as moral positions, as the correct, as good behavior, or from the other point of view, as wrong behavior. And my question is, if there is such a thing as objective morality, how do you determine which of those positions is objectively true or objectively moral without collapsing into talking about your own personal values?
Sorry, I was trying to type a response to Tilting Windmill. I'm getting a little bit too distracted here. Okay. So as the objective, I'm sorry, brother. Could you please repeat that? That's my fault.
Yeah, no worries. If you have three, let's just forget the actual example, abortion. Maybe that just kind of creates an unnecessary layer of complexity. You've got three different moral positions at odds with each other, and all the people who hold each position each believe that they are correct, and the other positions are wrong, morally wrong. How do you, if you're going to talk about objective morality, which is stance independent, which comes from outside of the human mind, it's somewhere out there, how do you determine which of those positions is the correct objective moral position without collapsing into discussing your own personal values?
This would be the consistency in between with what I was talking about before. So if I don't want, like you mentioned, the categorical imperative, right? If I don't want people to live in a society where people steal,
this is your values. This is your personal values, their subjective values. I'm asking, how do you make a determination of when you've got three conflicting moral standards, which, or perhaps none of them are? How do you determine what the objective moral standard is?
Yeah, that's what that's what I was commenting on. So we know that there are certain things that every single person desires for themselves, which has to do with their freedom and well-being. They need their freedom and well-being in order to accomplish their goals. So the standard becomes, are you affecting the freedom and well-being of other people? So that, like the theft, I don't want to steal from other people because I don't want to live in a society where people might steal from me because I'm protecting it's completely selfish. But every person holds this same standard universally that they don't want their shit taken. So the most effective way to make sure that happens is to not be a thief yourself. If you are a thief, then you're automatically creating an environment where people are stealing because you're stealing from other people.
It sounds to me like you're talking about the evolution of morality within societies to optimize social arrangements and social living. Because there are people who will believe themselves to be moral. They will say, I will go and take what you have, and I don't care that you value it. But for me, that's a moral good because I can do it. Those things exist. Those ideas exist. So, Again, what I'm hearing from you, just as a challenge to your position, I'm not actually hearing an argument for a stance-independent morality or a system of morality. What I'm hearing you do is apply your own subjective values about how you think society or individuals should best behave. And I think you're confusing that with an objective standard.
I think
not everybody shares your view on those things.
No, I agree with you. Not everybody does share those views, and I also agree that because I haven't really been able to be fully transparent, because I am trying to keep a couple of things for the debate, and I appreciate what you're saying, Bionic, about testing it before the debate, which I actually have done. I've got a couple people that I'm engaging with through emails that I presented the argument to, so I have been able to kind of test it that way. So far, it's been very effective. One of them has written a book on ethics, so he's been a great resource for me, giving me his time to do that. But as far as this conversation goes, I'm trying to do the best job I can without completely filleting my argument for Mark to pick apart beforehand. But I do think that our understanding of these things, I definitely agree that our understanding does evolve over time. But I see that very much like I would see like our understanding of science. Everybody thought the earth was flat. It takes time for people to realize through testing that the earth has never been flat. So ideas do evolve, or understanding of things do evolve over time. And I think the moral thing is the same way. I think the moral principles are fundamental. I think certain actions have specific consequences consistently. And it's our understanding of how these consequences come into play and how they ultimately affect us personally that we start to make these changes. But I do think it does change over time. And it does appear to be subjective because it does change over time. Like slavery, everybody thought that slavery was a great idea. And it's only been the last 150 whatever years, a couple hundred years, where we started to say, wait a minute, this whole owning other people as property, this is fundamentally wrong because a human being has this inherent value as just being a human being. Now, there are individuals even today that practice slavery, but every single country in the world has created laws against it because we are. Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention there's this, not only this argument that you're going to have to contend with, but you're going to have like p-value arguments that you're going to have to contend with. And it's one of the biggest ones that I have found lacking. It's like when you do like X or killing this person is wrong. So then you have killing is the P, is wrong is the X. What you have is you have to define what wrongness is. What are the properties of wrongness? And this is a problem because there's nothing consistent about what the properties of wrongness are. So I think it's problematic in that way also. I say there's two papers that I think are great papers to read on this, and they're kind of refuting one another on the subject. One was written in 2012, and it is called Must moral realism make semantic claims? And it's dealing with the problem that the majority of like the logical construct, I'm trying to think with the prepositional logic, when they build a prepositional logic phrase to say that morality is wrong, this is inside of semantics. And we've known this for a long time, that this is just in the vocabulary. And another gentleman addressed this just last year. It's an article called The Presumption of Realism by Dr. Niles Franson that addresses this quite well, that this is the majority of this construct, and all of these people that you're talking about, the 62%, that they think that it is morality is objective. It is in a semantic sense. It is in prepositional logic primarily. But the one that wrote the article, Must Realism Make a Semantic Claim, says that there are other defenses that are not semantic, and he goes into a few of them. I think that one's like 31 pages long. And then the presumption of realism is it's like 22 pages long, but they're both definitely worth a read.
Yeah, I would like to look into those actually. If I don't know, do you have my email address? It's tied to my channel. It's Objective Ethics YT for YouTube. So Objective Ethics YT at gmail.com. Anybody's welcome to reach out to me there. I set it up specifically, to take content from this channel, so it's not tied to anything.
I'll put the names over in chat, but they are open source PDFs that you can download. I think Phil Papers host both of them, so they shouldn't be hard to get a hold of. But I'll put the names of them. I have the PDFs that I was looking for, and I have the names of them, so you can download them. They're open source.
And maybe where I think I'm getting hung up is maybe it's my understanding of the word objective, because for me, I just maybe I need a definition of objective that also allows for social evolution and allows for changing cultural norms and allows for new information to change our definitions of things. Because from what I understand, objective means that X, whatever that objective X is reinforced as new information comes in and not modified and changed according to new information.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And there's something else I have to admit too, is that I have always considered this to be a binary or a dichotomy, right? It must be either one or the other. But I've been running into more and more people lately who believe that it can be actually both, that there are some fundamental things that are objective, like the murder, some of the easy stuff. But then you have more nuanced things where it's subjective, like with the abortion issue, for example. And I'm just so busy with real life stuff. I haven't really been able to dig deep into that, but I am curious, do you guys think that it's possible that there could be both positions, or is it truly a dichotomy?
I don't think it is. I argued in a book that I wrote called The Great Questions of Material Explanation for a type of foundationalism, that there's a foundational tenet that all consciousness that can arise cannot not possess that. And that is the value for truth. For information to be correct over information to be incorrect, that it is simply pragmatic to any consciousness that evolves, and that what we get is truth is kind of the foundation of behavior, that we want the correct information, and then subsequently that's not possible for consciousness to exist that does not have that desire. And if you want to call that, I guess, objective in some sense, if there's any life in the universe that has that foundational premises, then I would say that's something like a grounded objective position.
And I think for me, I think when in the language we use, or even in our constructs, our mental constructs, I think very little is pure or absolute. I think 99.9% of our language and our perception is subjective, and we use the term objective as a colloquialism or as a kind of a shorthand. But I'm also of the position that once we perceive it, once we perceive a thing, construct a thing, communicate that thing, we're tainting the objectivity with our own personal filters. So it's really hard to really capture objectivity in a bottle. I hope that makes sense. You know what I mean?
I think objective ethics, like he makes it clear that his position is stance independent, or AKA mind independent. So I think my understanding of that position is it's not affected by the changing, by the evolving human, by our societies, by the way things, move throughout time and place. So I think it's like if it's so this is my understanding of what objective ethics is trying to communicate, that there is some kind of never changing moral reality out there or beyond human minds, and that human societies, and I agree with him as well, sometimes we go backwards, all that kind of stuff is true as well, but as things change, we are either getting closer to those objective truths that exist outside of our heads, or we're moving further away from them. Is that a correct understanding of what you're trying to articulate?
Yes, that's absolutely right. And I think that Tilting Windmill mentioned he was trying to find a link to the debate. The debate is actually scheduled to be the 24th on the Raging Tomato site. For anybody who doesn't know, that's a pretty big debate site. The lady Sarah, I believe, is her name, who hosts that, and she used to be affiliated. My understanding is she's not anymore, but I don't really know enough about the history of all that. But she used to be affiliated at one point with Andrew Wilson, and so that site was really big. I'm sure you guys all know who Andrew Wilson and Jim Bob and those guys are. They're Christian apologists, essentially, who get into the debates scheme.
They're just I don't have a lot of respect for those guys.
No, I agree with you 100%. They're absolutely the type of debate that those guys engage in is a lot of personal attacks and over talking and just a lot of, you can tell it's really interesting because, in debate, there's a lot of ways you can go about it. And I'm not an experienced debater. Anybody who's seen my debates, you could clearly tell. Now I've gotten a lot better at it in a short time. I'm very proud of myself, to be honest with you, how much I've improved. And to be honest with you, a lot of that is because of Mark Reed, the person I'm going to be debating against. He actually reached out to me after watching my first debate and gave me a lot of advice. Ember, for Better Than Ember, for anybody who doesn't know, she's got a YouTube channel as well. In fact, Mark Reed has his own channel. I should plug that. And they both reached out to me and gave me some advice. In fact, my last debate that I had, not my last one, but the last debate I had against a Christian nationalist, they did a debate review on their channel. So I have developed a lot, but a lot of that's because of Mark himself. But as far as the debate goes, when I'm engaged in debate, I'm really trying to listen and understand where my opponent's coming from. And I also study both sides of the argument so that I can be as well prepared as possible. And I think that's the most respectful and productive way to have a debate. But there's another tactic where you can just try to steamroll people, and that's the Andrew Wilson tactic, where he just tries to just argue for the sake of arguing, doesn't actually pay attention to the things that are being presented, very dismissive, just kind of doesn't even address the stuff that his opponent is saying half the time. And so he's just waiting for his turn to talk. And I find that to be a very disingenuous way of debating. I guess if you're just out to win a debate, you could go that route, but I just don't find it to be very productive. And I don't think the audience learns anything that way. But It is a verbal blood sport, kind of a verbal fight, so to speak. And so I think there's a lot of attraction for some reason. And this is not how I am as a human being. I don't get attracted to people fighting. Watching people fight over things just is not entertaining to me at all. But when you look on social media, you look at some of the biggest YouTube channels, it is a blood sport, right? It's the us versus them, our view versus their view. And it gets very personal very quickly. And it seems to draw a lot of attention, so some people apparently are into it, but I don't know how productive it actually is.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to go objective. I had a really good time during this debate. I mean, not this debate, sorry, during this discussion. It was a great time, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come up here and talk about this. And I enjoyed talking with all of you. It was a great time.
I actually really enjoyed the conversation as well. And my wife is starting to wave me over. It looks like we're actually getting ready to eat something. So I'd like to give everybody a chance to have a final word. And I'd like to continue this conversation, but I really would prefer to continue it after the 24th, because then you guys can address my actual argument and pick it apart as much as you want. And maybe, I'm sure Mark's going to beat me up pretty hard over it anyway, but we'll see. I think it's a pretty strong argument, but I think I'll be able to do a better job of this conversation after I give my best argument for it. But let me give you each a chance to have a final word, introduce your channels, whatever it is you're into, any closing thoughts about this or anything else. And should we start with Steve? Do you want to start, since you're the person I've just getting a chance to meet? Do you want to give your final thoughts?
Yeah, cheers for letting me come on. I bluntly speaking, I think your position just lacks substance. So I'll just say, I think you're going to have a really uphill battle maintaining your position. I struggle with the syllogism. No, let me first say, the syllogisms you provide are very useful. You're one of the only people I see doing that, and I appreciate you actually putting your argument in a succinct manner. That's great. I wish more people would do that. It makes it so much easier. But I think I'm just not convinced by your argumentation. There are just too many holes in it. So, but I do wish you all the best, and hopefully we can continue the discussion after your debate with Mark. I have a channel. It's called Ephilism, EFILISM. That's my main YouTube presence. Have a look at it. It's about the antinatalism movement. But it's against it, by the way. So just take it. I'll just leave it there. And if you're interested in that stuff, but thank you again for letting me come on, and hopefully we can do this again.
Oh, I'll definitely look into your channel. Antinatalism is something that I've recently come across, and I think you and I may have crossed paths. And I don't think we've spoken before, but I think we both come from the same Finding Gnosis, if I remember right. You mentioned him, and that's the first exposure that I had to a real. I don't even know if I should use the word community with antinatalism.
No, well, I mean, if you ever want to have that discussion, I know my way around it quite well. So,
oh yeah, I find it to be quite fascinating. I find it to be self-refuting, to be honest with you. I think it's kind of a difficult position for a person who's walking around on this planet to talk about how terrible it is to be alive. And I don't want to promote people doing bad things, but life is a choice. At a very early age, we are actively choosing to be alive. So the whole antinatalist thing, I think, is really kind of strange. I'd love to see what your content is and see what you've had to say about that. So we'll definitely be catching up in the future. And if you do want to come back, you're always invited. I really appreciate your pushback. I think you're right that the previous syllogisms that I've used, they've gotten better over time, but each one of them is problematic, which is why I've had to go back to the drawing board so many times. I think my latest one is pretty solid, but one of the gentlemen who's been helping me with this argument, he actually did mention that trying to make this argument in syllogistic form is extremely difficult, which is why you really don't see it. But he said that that writing it out in more of like an essay style, where I could articulate each talking point, might be a better, more effective way to do it. So I'm going to stick with the syllogism at least one more time and see if I've got it dialed in. But it does make it nice, like you said, to where people can understand more clearly where I'm coming from. And I do agree with you. I wish more people would articulate their arguments in this type of a way. So it was so great to meet you, and I appreciate you coming on. I will be looking into your channel.
Cheers, man.
And Robert, did you want to have a final word, plug your channel, talk about any upcoming projects or anything like that? Or any comments at all?
Y'all know me. I'm just doing my own thing lately, bouncing around. I guess next Saturday I'm fixing to have Kurt on, and we're going to talk about the origins of Yahweh and how that deity kind of come through the ranks of gods and made it to the popularity that it did. So that's what we'll be talking about Saturday on Skeptic Philosophy. But I think your arguments can be stronger. I didn't come in to hear everything that you were talking about earlier, but I do think that it is not as open shut as some would make it sound on either side of it. I think they're good arguments both ways. From what I've heard from you, though, I would recommend doing some more reading to strengthen up your argument. And I do think that there are arguments other than semantic arguments, but there are semantic arguments also that use like prepositional logic to make the conclusion that therefore wrong. I think they're a little weak, but I would definitely read on them.
I appreciate the feedback as always, Robert. For those of you who haven't heard already, I'm fairly new into philosophy. It's been a few months now since I started, but Robert is actually the reason that got me started on this whole journey. And I'm so glad that he made this comment to me. We were both in somebody else's, on somebody else's channel. And I can't remember who it was. For some reason, I'm thinking it was Captive Desk, but it could have been any one of the channels. And made a comment about philosophy seems like a really entertaining thing to do for some people, but it doesn't really provide any anything useful to us. And Robert's like, oh no, you're missing out the whole point here. Philosophy is great, and it can teach us so much about life. And it really got me thinking, like, really, I need to take a closer look at this. And once I started opening up that whole Pandora's box, I've been absolutely just fascinated with philosophy, and I've been soaking up as much. My time is so limited, but for what time I've had, I've been investing so much in philosophy. And I agree with you that there are really good arguments on both sides for subjective or objective morality, which may be why people might be right that maybe it's a little bit of both, something I hadn't really considered before until more recently. But I always appreciate the feedback and the constructive criticism and the challenge to do a better job. And I really appreciate you guys coming onto this channel so that we could set this example for people, that we can have these disagreements and be very respectful to each other and considerate of, what ultimately we're trying to get people to just treat each other better, and maybe explore a little bit of philosophy along the way. So thank you so much for coming in, Robert. Chris, did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to make about anything at all? Talk about projects you're interested in doing, or anything that you want to solve the world's problems?
I mean, if you got 5 minutes, I could solve the world's problems. Yeah, I'm really good at that. Yeah, no, actually, I have nothing really to kind of plug or whatever. I mean, I have a channel that I've neglected. I think at this point, I lurk and jump in on people's streams. That's what I do. My personal brand is, I don't know what I'm talking about, but I have strong opinions. So if you see me floating around, I'll probably pop in with my uninformed opinions, and thank you for tolerating them. So I'm happy to be here.
Oh, it's always good to see. I didn't even realize that Scott. I'm sorry, I'm not paying attention to the chat. I'm really bad at this, you guys. Like, there's just too much going on here, and I am getting a little bit of kind of loopy because I'm so hungry. I kind of missed breakfast here, but Scott is also here, and it's always nice to see him stop by. Robin's back. She's definitely a great person to check out. If you haven't looked into her stuff, I see her quite a bit on different channels. I think I always get confused, but I believe it's Missing Mod's channel, if I'm remembering right, where I see Robin actually talking and engaging. And Robin, you guys are, everybody's always welcome to jump on here for one of these discussions. It's great to get different viewpoints and different ideas. Chris, I really appreciate you stopping by. You've been a support for the channel since day one, when I was really trying to figure things out. I remember that I'll never forget that first test video I put out. My audio wasn't even working, and I didn't realize it. And if Chris hadn't have said something, I probably would have gone on for an hour talking to myself with no audio. So you're outstanding. Bro, I appreciate the support. Thank you for stopping by today. Johnny, I know you kind of did a little outro there. Did you have any other final words that you wanted to say before I wrap this up? Anything you wanted to share about just anything we've talked about, or anything we haven't even touched on yet? Feel free. The floor is yours.
We'll be doing the first Sunday of every month.
Sorry, I missed what you said, brother.
We're doing first Sunday of every month, right?
First Sunday of every month. Did you say we're going to deal with Micah on the next show?
Yep. Everybody, stay tuned for the first Sunday of February. We'll be doing Micah 5. We'll be going over Micah 5:2 and why it's not about Jesus.
That'll be a great show. So we are doing a short series. I don't know how long it's going to last. I mean, I've heard so many different ridiculous claims about how many prophecies that were supposedly fulfilled, messianic prophecies, throughout the Bible. I've heard the number over 300. I can't even conceptualize, more than about a couple dozen possibilities. So it'll be interesting to see how many of these Johnny knows. But this is really Johnny's bag that he's into, that he's bringing to the table. I said I would platform him, and I've been really impressed so far. He's done a really good job of giving a really good argument from within the scripts themselves, doing an exegesis of it, using the Bible to disprove the Bible is always the most effective way to dismantle this bullshit. And so I really appreciate the effort he's put into it. He came well prepared today, put together a great presentation. I'm trying my best to try and learn some of this technology when I have time. And so hopefully it'll continue to be a little bit more professional each time. I've got some people that are involved behind the scenes making thumbnails. I've got another lady. I do a fitness side. For those of you who don't know, I'm recovering from major surgery. So I'm actually building my fitness level back up to where I used to be. And I'm actually tracking that. So if you guys have any fitness questions, which I know seems completely unrelated to what we're talking about today, but I do a lot with that. I used to work as a personal trainer certified. Now I still do it on the side, make a little extra money. So if you have any specific fitness questions, if you're trying to get in shape, if you're trying to lose weight, if you have a particular sport that you're like, right now I'm dealing with a lady and she wants to be a professional soccer player. So I've done all this. If you're recovering from an injury, I have a lot of knowledge in that area. So I put out videos for, you know, exercise and stuff. But if you have specific questions, a specific injury that you're targeting or something like that, feel free to reach out to me. I believe my email should be publicly viewable if you look at the description of my channel, but just in case, I'll say it again. It's Objective Ethics YT for Objective Ethics YouTube, and that's at Gmail. Reach out to me if you have specific questions about anything, and I'll answer your questions and maybe even make a video for you. I've got a gal who reached out to me who's got some neck problems. She's a teacher. She sits at her desk all day. She's got some chronic neck pain. So this Wednesday, I've got the lady who does the filming. She hooks up all my other social media stuff. What the fuck is that called? TikTok, Instagram, all that stuff. I don't have time to deal with. So the channel is growing really fast because of her efforts and because you guys have been so supportive. I think next Wednesday will mark my 1 month. I believe, yeah, next Wednesday is 1 month at this. And I think I'm going to top 8,000 views in my first month, which is fucking phenomenal. I cannot believe this channel's taken off like that. When I started this, I only did it. Scott and Sophia were gracious enough to let me be on their channel and talk about some fun stuff. But there's just more stuff I wanted to get into, and I didn't want to step on anybody's toes. So I thought I would just start a channel to kind of get into some of the other topics that I wanted to talk about. And I thought I might get 15 to maybe 25 subscribers total. And I'm over 100 already. So I'm really shocked at how this is taking off. I'm really grateful for all the support that I've gotten. If anybody has anything specific they want to discuss, the platform is open every Sunday. I try to open up the panel at some point. I've got a couple of guests scheduled. Next week is going to be Tavo Sanabri. We're going to discuss comparative theology. The week after that, the gentleman who was on here earlier, Dr. Dan Norton, he's going to come on. We're going to discuss Ayn Rand's ethics. I think if there's another, I've got A's Philosophy. He's coming on the week in between those two, actually. Dan's coming the 25th. So A's Philosophy is coming on the week after Tavo Sanabri. He's a Christian who's got a pretty unique view. He rejects Paul, which takes out most of the New Testament. So his views are going to be very interesting to see how he kind of synthesizes his Christianity with compared to other Christian beliefs. So I am trying to platform people from both sides of the aisle. I've got some Muslim friends who are considering coming on. That'll probably be into February. So I've got quite a bit already scheduled out in advance. I've got an author who wrote a book about religious trauma, and so he's going to come on. So there's a lot going on with the channel, and just please do stay tuned. Like and subscribe, leave comments, do all that good shit. And thank you so much, everybody, for taking time out of your day to participate and to view the show. Really appreciate it.
Had a great time. Thank you for having us.
All right, bon appetit, buddy.
Hey, appreciate it. Y'all have a good one. Take care, man.
Bye, Objective.
Easy.